Story 1. Wife cheated with my best friend on our group trip while I was home injured. They sent videos of it. I confronted her, had a revenge affair. Then we divorced. It's been 4 years to the month since this happened. I was 36 at the time and had been with my wife, Chrissy, 35F, for 15 years, married for 12. We lived a comfortable upper-middle-class life and had a 14-year-old daughter. I had 2 best friends that I had met in college, Eric and Mike. Eric, 34M, was married to Emily, 30F, and Mike, 34M, had gotten divorced from his wife that spring. Through us, Chrissy and Emily had become best friends, as well as a group of 3 couples. We had been taking a week-long vacation every summer for a few years at this point. Everything was booked and ready when I broke my ankle 3 days before our travel date. Because of this, I decided to not go on the trip as 1. I was non-weight bearing for 16 weeks, 2. My meds made me extremely tired and sleepy, and 3. I just didn't want to be a burden to everyone else's fun. My wife offered to stay home with me several times, but I convinced her to go ahead and go on the trip. Thus, due to divorce and my ankle, the trip ended up just being Chrissy, Eric, Emily, and Mike. D-Day happened on December 7, 2019. Chrissy and Emily had planned a girl shopping weekend a couple hours away with a hotel on Saturday night. They got caught because of the Snapchat map thing. That night, after sending my wife a snap of the dog, I flipped to the map only to notice that Mike was in the exact same location as her. There was no reason for Mike to be in that city at all. My mind immediately went to the worst, and I began to furiously blow up my wife's phone with calls and texts but was completely ignored. Knowing Emily should be there as well, I called Eric to see where she was. I told him what I had seen and that I was about to make the drive to confront them and asked if Emily had made the trip. In the saddest voice, he said yes. Chrissy picked her up that morning, and he knew that Mike would be there. For a moment, I felt relief. It sounded like Mike and Emily were having an affair, and my wife was just a cover. But then he said, "They're having a trio." I went totally numb, but he continued to talk and said, "I'm sorry. It's not the first time she's been with Mike either, and I've been with her too." My numbness ceased and was replaced by rage. I dressed and threatened Eric before finally hanging up. I had totally snapped, broke a few things around the house, screamed, and cursed everyone. My daughter came out, clearly afraid and concerned. She had never seen me like that, and I was hobbling around as I'd only been cleared for walking 3 or 4 weeks earlier. Upon seeing her, I pulled it together, reassured her, apologized, told her everything was fine, and that I only freaked out because of a work thing. I'm sure she knew that was all a lie. She isn't dumb. Once she went back to her room, I retreated to mine and called Eric. He picked up right away. I told him he better tell me everything right now. He said he wouldn't leave anything out. It started with the vacation back in July. It was basically 5 days with a travel day on each end. The first day was largely just a chill day around the pool at the Airbnb. It was day 2 when things started to happen. I knew a full outing had been planned that day without their spouses. Mike and Chrissy kind of naturally paired off, seeing as they were with a married couple. It all seemed innocent enough and just friendly, but they seemed to get more comfortable as the day went on. That night was a pretty heavy drinking night with dinner back at the B&B. Through dinner and after, the drinking continued. Emily noticed how much flirtier and closer Chrissy and Mike were getting. After a while, Eric and Emily went to their room and left Mike and Chrissy alone. After about an hour, Emily decided to quietly venture out to see what became of them. She went by Chrissy's room only to find she wasn't there. She then crept up to Mike's room to hear the clear, distinct sounds of sex between 2 drunk people trying to keep it down. Emily came back to the room and told Eric what was going on. I interrupted him at this point and said, "How could she just let this happen? You said she noticed them getting like this during dinner. Why didn't she pull Chrissy aside and intervene?" This is where the story went from bad to just totally effed. Apparently, Eric and Emily had been having marital strife themselves for some time, which included a lot of bedroom issues. She had been asking for an open relationship for roughly 6 months at this point. He had finally caved but asked if they could try swinging first. It was their plan to ask Chrissy and me to swing with them on the trip, but when I broke my ankle and didn't go, They figured it was a moot point. So when Chrissy and Mike had their drunken indiscretion, Emily figured maybe the swinging could be back on. The next morning, Emily went to talk to Chrissy about it. She said Chrissy had the expected guilt, an extreme worry about being found out, especially since there were witnesses. She said it was a huge mistake, but also that it was really, really good, especially for drunk sex. Emily said, "Why stop? He just got divorced. You have been on edge because of work for a year now. We're on vacation, and nothing came with you. Not your job, not Chuck, that's me, not Cora, our daughter. You left your whole life behind. Consider it a free week. Eric and I won't say a thing, and we'll cover if anything comes up." Eric told me she apparently liked the sound of it but had apprehension. She went to talk to Mike, and then Mike came to Eric asking if they were for real about letting this happen. Eric said yes. He had been coached up by Emily as to what to say and told him to just get it out. "Over the next few days, you both deserve a real vacation from everything, and when we go back it all just goes back to normal and Chuck will never know." I was ready to throw up hearing this. The betrayal of my wife and my two closest friends hit like an anvil. My head was spinning. I was so angry and hurt at the same time, but I needed to know the whole deal. He said over the next 3 days they stuck to all the plans for the trip. I know this to be true because all the expected IG and Facebook posts went up. I kept getting included in the group snap from everyone, and Chrissy would call twice a day to check in with intermittent texts throughout the day. I suspected absolutely nothing while back home recovering. Update 1. He said those last 3 days Mike and Chrissy basically acted like a newly dating couple. They made sure on outings that any pictures/posts/snaps were innocent, but they held nothing back in terms of holding hands or kissing, and whenever they got back to the B&B it was almost always immediately to Mike's bed. They were not quiet about it. It was very evident what they were doing and for how long. He said on the 4th night they didn't even close the door. On the 5th day, Emily enacted her plan. Eric doesn't know what was said, but she got her to agree to the swap. Mike did say something to Eric, and Eric just said yeah, it's what he wanted. It wasn't, but he had totally caved to Emily's pressure by this point. That night he was with Chrissy. He said they did have sex, among other things, and he tried to get into it but was preoccupied knowing Emily was with Mike down the hall. He said Chrissy put on a good show but he knows she wasn't really satisfied. He said the part that really stung his ego was she went back to her room while Emily spent the whole night with Mike. In the morning, he overheard Chrissy say, "You owe me one," to Emily right when she got up. That was the day they traveled back, all silently swearing to take it to the grave. I remember Chrissy getting home and immediately coming to check on me and acting like she was so excited to see me. I realized now that she was doing what betrayed spouses call love bombing. This went on for weeks, and I should have known something was up. We had a good relationship, but she was so attentive and caring and loving for several weeks upon return. I always thought it was just guilt from leaving me behind with my broken ankle and just feeling refreshed from the vacation. I guess it was really guilt from the cheating. Eric went on to say as soon as they got back from vacation, Emily was dead set on the open relationship now. There was no other option. Eric agreed and they landed on some ground rules. First and foremost, everything was to be all access. Messages, conversations, everything. I asked, why the hell would he want all that if he hated the idea of her seeing other guys? He said he asked for that because her first rule was no limits. He wanted to have a list of people who were off limits, and she said no. This was about being open sexually, and they couldn't do that if people were off limits. It was going to be the same for both of them, so he should be fine with it. If he wanted to try and EFF her sister, he could, and she didn't want coworkers, exes, anyone off her list either. He agreed on the stipulation he knows everything and has access to everything. He said he did this to collect evidence for his eventual divorce. She resisted at first, but when he said he'd expose what happened on vacation, she caved. At this point, he asked if I wanted all the messages. He had the vast majority of stuff. It was his wife with other men, coworkers, randoms. She had been busy, but there were plenty of messages between Chrissy and Emily. I picked up that Emily and Mike had started a regular affair about 4 months earlier. About 1 month ago, the conversation of the trio started. That whole time after the vacation, Chrissy had been really good to me and seemed much happier than before. In the beginning of the convo, she stuck to the idea that what happened on vacation was it. It was a vacation from reality, and now it was over and life would just go on like normal. About 2 weeks in, she started to show some interest at Emily's encouragement. This is when Mike entered the conversation too. Chrissy agrees at this point, and the plan comes to be. In addition, Eric had a photo of Chrissy and Mike kissing and a recording of him having sex with her. The son of AB had sneakily recorded it. Not the best quality vid, but he did manage to get a clear shot of her face and tattoo. I thanked him for the evidence, then told him he was a piece of crap, and after we had our divorces, he better never effing contact me again. Update 2. Chrissy went radio silent from my first frantic call until she walked in the door at 7 p.m. on Sunday night. She looked beyond nervous and scared. She already knew I was aware of everything. Eric had left Emily a voicemail telling her he gave me everything, told me everything, that he wouldn't be there when she got home, and she needed to sign the divorce papers on the kitchen table. I told Chrissy to get her shit together. Cora came out a moment later, and for a couple of hours we pretended to have a normal Sunday night. Once she went to bed, I asked Chrissy what she wanted. She immediately broke down in tears and tried to hug me. I blocked the advance, and she began apologizing profusely and begging for forgiveness. I told her to save it, we had a lot to talk about. I wanted every question answered 100% honestly. If I thought she was lying, I would end the conversation here and file for divorce on Monday. I had tons of evidence, and she wouldn't be able to get out of it. We are not in a no-fault state. Then I pointed out that she didn't answer my question. I wanted to know what she wants. She said she wanted to show me how sorry she was. She wanted to work for forgiveness and for us to work past this. I told her I didn't think it was possible, but would let her explain herself. I asked why she cheated in the first place. She said she had a lot of fun that day, was feeling good and relaxed. She hadn't felt that way in a long time. Work had been so stressful for so long. She let the moment, the drinks, take over and just went with it. She tried telling me how terrible she felt after, but I cut her off. I wanted to know why she kept doing it. It was a totally honest answer. She wanted to and could. Yes, Emily did get in her head a bit, but also she justified it to herself by saying she had already cheated once. What was the difference at this point? The next part was hard to hear as she described what kind of things they did, as it was a total when in Rome thing. Some of it she hadn't done to me in years. I asked if she was unhappy in our relationship, and she said no. She said we have a good marriage. She just wanted to feel wild, feel excited. We had gotten somewhat monotonous, and this experience was exhilarating. Her plan had been to have this much sex with me, but when I didn't go, she had first thought, well, that's out, but once it was available, she let herself get taken by the moment. I then asked about the swapping. She said that was a huge mistake. Emily had talked to her about that on the last full day and about how they were trying it, and she thought this was even better than Chrissy and Emily said it's perfect because she isn't even giving up Chuck, just Mike for one night. She knew Emily complained about sex with Eric and voiced that concern. Emily claimed Eric was doing a lot better in this department but also kind of flipped the table saying she needed this badly too, and since she was going to cover for Chrissy, this was a great way to repay her. I asked about the trio, asked why she planned that. Chrissy said she never intended to step out of line again and swore she was going to make the most of our relationship going forward. This would explain the weeks of love bombing upon her return. She had been talking with Emily like usual, and she just seemed like she was having the time of her life now that she was open. Chrissy admitted to being a little jealous. Emily had been with several men, and Chrissy was living a bit vicariously through her. When Emily started the affair with Mike, she knew what she was missing and became more jealous. For the record, I know Mike had a rep in college for being a ladies' man and, if I'm being honest, was the best looking of the three of us. He had managed to stay the most fit as he aged and had only improved post-divorce. Chrissy said when the trio got proposed, she really tried to stay strong and not get drawn in, but as the weeks went on, she found herself just thinking about it. She told me she caved because Mike was really good. She had never had a trio and honestly thought she could get away with it at that point. She asked how I figured it out and I said I didn't have to answer that. I asked why she didn't come right home once she knew I was on to her. She said, because we were just going to do this. I knew this was coming. Is there really a difference between me staying and continuing the sex I planned and running home right away? The end results are the same. I asked her if there was anything else, and she said no. She just wanted a chance to earn trust, forgiveness, and to reconcile. I said no, I don't want this anymore. I am hurt, betrayed, and can't stand to look at her. I was going to file for divorce the very next day. Update 3. When I woke, Chrissy was still home. She usually was on her way to the office but had taken the day off anticipating I had done the same thing. Once Cora was off to school, she began her love bombing. I told her I didn't care. I'd already seen all this before. She said she had one more proposal for me. All access to her, all of her stuff, all the time. Marriage counseling. She would go to individual counseling. Cut off Emily permanently. And she would be an open book at all times for any questions. I said those are just things you do when you are trying to reconcile. I don't want to be a warden at home and I don't want to reconcile. She begged and pleaded and asked that I just wait a week, just a week, and if next Monday I still felt the same, she would sign no matter what, no contest. I ended up agreeing to the 1-week trial. She continued to love bomb and consistently tried initiating sex. I rejected these usual efforts and on Thursday told her I was not moved in any way and still planned to file on Monday. Friday after work, I could tell she had something in mind. I really didn't care. I was literally counting the hours until I could be rid of her at this point. The love bombing was not working, and I was actually getting annoyed with her overzealous efforts. She said she thought we couldn't go on because of the imbalance that her infidelity had caused. I wasn't sure at first if she was implying what I thought she was implying, but she was. Chrissy said we should have a trio. I said, you did more than that. She said, okay, and you can have a week off marriage. I pointed out that was worthless. She's a woman. If she wanted, she could go out right now and find a guy to have sex that very moment. I'm a guy, and unless you're a rich guy or a famous guy, you're not picking up women that easily. There's no point in me sitting in bars for a week or on dating apps not getting matches. She said, okay, you can have 10 hall passes that never expire. That can be the same woman or 10 different. I replied, you think that's not going to impact our sex life? You're going to be okay with that because I doubt it. She said she won't let it suffer. She will make a huge effort to be available for my needs, and we can do any of the things I've ever wanted. I told her I needed to think about it. In retrospect, I realized that what I did next was pretty sleazy. I should have walked away and started over, but I didn't. I told myself, why not? Here was a trio on the table. Here was any fantasy I had on the table, and I could use the 10 hall passes to find someone else to move on with, and when it was over I would still divorce her all the same. She had wronged me, and in my mind, cashing in on these offers was totally justified revenge. I said I agreed, but I wanted the trio to be soon. I said she needed to have at least someone agreeing by February 1st, where I was out, because if she couldn't, that meant she wasn't trying and had just been out to buy herself time. I don't know how she found the girl, but in the week between Christmas and New Year, she showed me a picture of a girl from her spin class. She was gorgeous, and I couldn't believe she found someone that quick and someone so attractive. Tiffany was 25 years old. She and Chrissy had been chatting at Spin for months, but nothing past regular small talk. I asked how, and Chrissy just said she had her ways. My assumption was she offered her a few hundred. About 2 weeks later was the big night. I did something out of spite though, and it's kind of weird. I didn't act selfish. I'd been on Reddit for years at this point and had read several trio stories and advice threads where one partner, usually a woman in FFM, feels left out as their partner focuses on the new person. I made it a point to make sure she was included in the whole thing, insisted on Tiffany and I be focused on my wife, talked to her throughout, complimented her, etc. I mean, I still had my fun with Tiffany, but I knew this would make Chrissy think we were on the right track. I wasn't wrong. She told me how she only did this to win me back, but that the whole experience was amazing, and she couldn't believe that it really did make her feel like we had a stronger connection. Prior to that, I had been cashing in on her obligation of being overtly sexual with me. After the trio, it had stopped feeling like she was just meeting an obligation. She seemed excited to be with me and to try new things, although I think a part of it was her hope that I would abandon the hall passes. Update 4, mid-February, I took the first plunge into using the hall passes. There was a 27-year-old restaurant manager, Sabrina, close by my work. I had frequented it often and always thought she was a little flirty with me. I asked her out and lied. I told her I was 2 months into my divorce proceedings. I said we were still living in the same house but that I had moved into the basement. Another lie. Sabrina seemed hesitant but agreed to the date. Later on, I asked her what made her agree, knowing my situation, and she said she noticed the first time I came in without my wedding ring. I took it off on D-Day, and since by the time I asked her my tan line was fading away, it meant I wasn't just taking it off to meet women but not wearing it at all. It wasn't too far after that the COVID shutdown began to hit. At that point I felt stuck, but I used it as an excuse to not start marriage counseling. Chrissy had been insistent on this, but I always said I wouldn't until after the trio. Then I said I wouldn't until after I went on a date, and as soon as that happened, shutdown started. By April, I had seen Sabrina 7 times. We went on 2 actual dates that really tore Chrissy up before the shutdowns. Once those started, I just began going over to Sabrina's apartment as she lived alone. Needless to say, our relationship turned physical. At this point, I was tired of pretending to reconcile. I also think I had hurt Chrissy enough. She was too. I still feel heavy guilt for this today. When I said it didn't work and I still wanted to divorce, she didn't fight me. She was sad. She seemed defeated. I found a small 2-bedroom house and left Chrissy in our family home. The one stand-up thing I can say I did in all this was sit Cora down and tell her the absolute truth. I told her the whole story from the beginning. Her mom's infidelity and my sleazy behavior after. I wanted her to know both of her parents were wrong. We both loved her and each other, but we both wronged each other too deeply. The 3 of us decided that 50-50 custody was best, so she alternated week to week staying at each other's place. It took until January of 2021 for the divorce to go final. I dated Sabrina the entire time. Cora and her got along fine. I was happy Cora didn't see her as the other woman or anything. They never had a step-parent vibe or anything but were friendly in the way a child is with their parents' friends. My relationship with Sabrina lasted until January of this year. It ended because I don't want to marry again or have more children. Chrissy had done some sporadic dating over the last couple of years. One guy she was with for about 11 months, then things got weird. We have co-parented pretty effectively through all this. The one thing we both wanted was to be there for our daughter. We've been amicable through all of her events and for her sake. Then her high school graduation happened this past May. We ended up sitting by each other. What should have been awkward just wasn't. We started joking around, talking, got a little flirty. It was refreshing. A week later, I was still thinking of the fun I had at graduation. I decided to call Chrissy and ask her out. She said, "Absolutely not." This caused quite the swell of embarrassment. Luckily, that was only temporary. After a long pause, she continued, "Unless we go to marriage counseling." I agreed. We had our first session on a Thursday and our first date on Friday. We are still doing counseling. We decided on a counselor that specializes in ethical non-monogamy, as that was something we both want to explore. It's been 6 months. We've started to talk about me moving back into our original family home. Cora can't believe we are getting back together and says it's weird. She told me when she got back from her first semester at college last week that she wasn't sure if she was happy or concerned, but knows for sure she doesn't want any details of any kind in regards to our exploits. Eric divorced Emily and ran for the hills. He put in a work transfer and now lives 4 states away. Mike and Emily tried to make a real relationship work for a while after her divorce. Chrissy got back in contact with Emily after a while and learned that pretty much sex was the only thing they had in common, and it fizzled out pretty quick. Emily remarried a guy that used to work with Eric and moved with him when he was promoted to a regional manager spot. He is now Eric's direct boss and keeps blocking his transfer. I find this the most hilarious irony I have ever heard. Mother effer Mike, as I refer to him, is still around and still single. I wish him only the worst. Well, that's my story. One day I hope to give a happy ending update, but I guess only time will tell. P.S. Chrissy paid Tiffany $250 for the trio. Happy holidays. Now on to the next story. Story 2. Before we start, if you're enjoying this video so far, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Now let's continue. My sister-in-law tried to take my kids after my wife died. She called CPS on me, but the judge's decision left her speechless. I, 29M, lost my wife, Mia, 31F, in a tragic car accident 6 months ago. We have twin boys, Ethan and Noah, 7M, and adjusting to life without their mom has been incredibly difficult. Mia and I met in high school when I was a sophomore and she was a senior. It wasn't love at first sight or anything dramatic like that. We were lab partners in AP biology, and at first we couldn't stand each other. I thought she was uptight because she was so focused on getting perfect grades, and she thought I was a slacker because I was always joking around. But as we worked together over the semester, things changed. I saw how passionate Mia was about science and how her eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams of working in tech. She saw that beneath my joker exterior, I was actually pretty good at biology and cared about doing well. We started hanging out outside of class, studying together, and eventually those study sessions turned into date nights. Everyone thought we wouldn't last when Mia went off to college. They said high school relationships never survive long distance, but we proved them wrong. We talked every day, visited each other as often as we could, and when I graduated 2 years later, I chose a college near her so we could finally be together again. We got married right after I finished college. It was a small ceremony in my parents' backyard. Mia's sister, Jen, 35F, was the maid of honor, and my best friend from college was the best man. Mia's parents, John, 62M, and Linda, 60F, were over the moon. They'd always treated me like a son, and now it was official. We had the boys a year later. It wasn't planned. We were both freaking out when we found out Mia was pregnant, and then doubly so when we learned it was twins. But from the moment Ethan and Noah were born, they became our whole world. Mia was always the ambitious one. She landed a job as a software engineer at a big tech company right out of college and quickly climbed the ranks. I had studied education, planning to become a teacher, but when the boys were born, we decided it made more sense for me to stay home with them. Mia's salary was more than enough to support us, and childcare for twins would have eaten most of my potential teaching salary anyway. I loved being a stay-at-home dad. I got to witness all of the boys' firsts. First steps, first words, first day of school. Mia would come home every evening eager to hear about their day, and weekends were always family time. We had a good life, a happy life. Then, 6 months ago, everything changed. Mia was driving home from a late night at work. It had been raining. The roads were slick. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car. She died on impact, in an instant. Our perfect little world shattered. The first few weeks after Mia's death are a blur. I was in shock, going through the motions of arranging the funeral and taking care of the boys, but not really processing what had happened. Jen and my parents were a huge help during that time. They practically moved in, cooking meals, helping with the boys, fielding calls from well-wishers. But as the weeks turned into months, I started to feel suffocated. Jen, in particular, seemed reluctant to leave. She'd come over every day, often staying late into the evening. At first, I was grateful for the help. She'd cook meals, help with the boys' homework, and even started teaching them how to play the piano, something Mia had always wanted to do but never had the time for. However, over time, Jen's behavior became increasingly controlling and critical. She started making comments about my parenting. She'd say things like, "Mia would have done it this way," or, "The boys need a woman's touch." It hurt, but I brushed it off, thinking she was just grieving too. Then she began criticizing my efforts to find a job. With Mia gone, I needed to start earning an income to support the boys. But every time I mentioned a job application or an interview, Jen would say, "You should be focusing on the boys, not on your career," or, "Mia wouldn't want you to put the boys in daycare." I tried to explain that I didn't have a choice. Our savings wouldn't last forever, and while Mia had life insurance, I wanted to save that money for the boys' future. But Jen wouldn't listen. She kept insisting that she and her husband, Mark, 37M, could help out financially if needed. Things came to a head last week when Jen showed up unannounced with a stack of papers. She sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where Mia and I had spent countless evenings planning our future, and told me she thought it would be best if she became the boys' legal guardian. I was stunned. Jen went on to explain that she and Mark could provide a more stable home environment and that the boys needed a mother figure. She talked about how they had a bigger house in a better school district, how Mark's job as a lawyer meant they were financially secure, how she could stay home full-time with the boys just like I had done. I listened in disbelief as Jen laid out her plan. She said I could still see the boys whenever I wanted, that this wasn't about taking them away from me, but about doing what was best for them. She even suggested I could move in with them at least for a while to help with the transition. When I finally found my voice, I told her absolutely not. These were my children. We had raised them together, planned their futures together. I was perfectly capable of continuing to raise them on my own. Jen didn't take my refusal well. She started yelling, saying I was being selfish and not thinking about what's best for the boys. She brought up every little mistake I'd made in the past 6 months, like the time I forgot to pack Ethan's lunch for a school trip, or when Noah got a bad grade because I didn't help him study for a test. She had the audacity to say that Mia would be disappointed in me. That was the last straw. I lost my temper and told Jen to leave. I said she was no longer welcome in our home if she couldn't respect my role as the boy's father. She left in tears, but I thought that would be the end of it. Yesterday, I got a call from Child Protective Services. They informed me that someone had reported concerns about my ability to care for the boys. They didn't tell me who made the report, but I knew it had to be Jen. I'm furious and terrified. The CPS worker is scheduled to visit our home next week for an inspection. I called John and Linda to tell them what happened, hoping they'd talk some sense into Jen. Instead, they sided with her. They think I'm being unreasonable and that I should consider Jen's offer for the sake of the boys. They even suggested that I move in with them and let them help raise the kids. I feel like I'm being attacked from all sides. These people claim to love my boys, but they're trying to tear apart the only stable thing the twins have left, their relationship with me. I'm doing my best to juggle everything. And yes, I've made mistakes, but I love my sons more than anything in this world. Last night, after I put the boys to bed, I sat in Mia's old home office, surrounded by her things. Her degrees hanging on the wall, family photos on the desk, even her favorite coffee mug still sitting where she left it that last morning. I broke down and cried for the first time in months. I miss her so much. I miss her advice, her laugh, the way she could always calm me down when I was stressed. I don't know how to do this without her, but I have to figure it out for Ethan and Noah. They've already lost their mother. I can't let them lose their father too. I don't know what to do. Should I give in to avoid a messy legal battle? Should I cut ties with my family completely? How do I protect my rights as a father while also doing what's best for my boys? Date 1. It's been a month since my last post, and a lot has happened. First, I want to thank everyone for their supportive comments and advice. Your words really helped me gain perspective and find the strength to stand up for myself and my boys. The CPS visit happened 2 weeks ago, and it went better than I expected. The social worker, Sarah, was understanding and professional. She arrived early in the morning, just as I was getting the boys ready for school. I was nervous, but I tried to act as normal as possible for Ethan and Noah's sake. Sarah observed our morning routine. Me making breakfast, okay. Pouring cereal, but hey, it was a nutritious brand. Helping the boys pack their backpacks, and double-checking that Ethan had his inhaler. She seemed impressed by how well-behaved the boys were and how smoothly everything ran. After I dropped the boys off at school, Sarah inspected our home. I'll admit it wasn't spotless. There were some dishes in the sink from the night before and toys scattered in the living room, but it was clean where it mattered. No safety hazards, plenty of food in the fridge, clean clothes in the boys' dressers. I showed Sarah the boys' room, which still has some of Mia's touches. She had painted a mural of a forest on one wall when the boys were toddlers. The boys love it so much that I can't bring myself to paint over it, even though it makes my heart ache every time I see it. Sarah noticed the piano in the living room and asked about it. I explained that Jen had been teaching the boys to play, but I didn't go into detail about our falling out. I did mention that music had been important to Mia and that I was trying to keep that part of her alive for the boys. I had prepared a folder with important documents. The boys' medical records, school reports, and even a detailed schedule of our daily routine. I also had documentation of my job search efforts and financial plans. Sarah seemed impressed by my organization and dedication. During her visit, Sarah interviewed me about our situation. I was honest about the challenges I've been facing as a single dad, but I also emphasized all the efforts I've been making. I told her about our family counseling sessions, about how I've been encouraging the boys to talk about their mom and their feelings. Sarah didn't ask directly about who had made the CPS report, but she did ask if there was anyone who might have concerns about my parenting. I hesitated, then decided to be honest. I explained the situation with Jen and my parents, including my suspicions about who made the report. Sarah didn't confirm or deny, but she did say that false reports are taken very seriously. A week after the visit, I received a call from Sarah. She informed me that the case was being closed as they found no evidence of neglect or abuse. She also mentioned that they would be investigating the source of the report for potential misuse of the system. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. With that hurdle cleared, I decided it was time to confront Jen. I invited her over for a talk while the boys were at a friend's house. When she arrived, I could see she was nervous. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where she had ambushed me with her guardianship papers a month ago. I calmly laid out everything. How her behavior had been affecting me and the boys, my suspicions about the CPS report, and my decision going forward. I told her that while I appreciated her help in the beginning, her recent actions had crossed a line. Jen broke down in tears, admitting that she had indeed called CPS. She said she was worried about the boys and thought she was doing the right thing. She talked about how seeing me struggle reminded her of when Mia and I were first dating, how protective she had felt of her little sister. Then I told her that while I understood she was grieving too, her actions were unacceptable. I explained that, for the time being, she would not be allowed unsupervised visits with the boys. If she wanted to see them, it would have to be with me present. Jen didn't take this well. She accused me of using the boys to punish her and threatened to take legal action for grandparents' rights on behalf of John and Linda. I stood my ground, telling her that any further threats would result in her losing all contact with the boys. After Jen left, I called John and Linda. I explained everything that had happened and my decision regarding Jen. To my surprise, they were more understanding than I expected. They admitted that they had been worried but realized they had overstepped. They apologized for suggesting I give up custody and asked if we could work on rebuilding our relationship. We agreed to start with short, supervised visits. They came over last weekend and it was okay, not great but not terrible either. The boys were happy to see their grandparents, and John and Linda seemed to make an effort to support my parenting decisions rather than questioning them. As for the boys, I've been honest with them about what's going on in an age-appropriate way. They miss their aunt, but they've been incredibly resilient. We've started seeing a family counselor to help us navigate this difficult time. In our last session, Noah admitted that he sometimes feels angry at Mia for leaving us. It broke my heart, but the counselor said it's a normal feeling for kids dealing with loss. On a positive note, I've managed to secure a work-from-home job as a customer service representative for an online retailer. It's not ideal and definitely not what I imagined I'd be doing with my education degree, but it allows me to be there for the boys while still earning an income. The hours are flexible so I can work while the boys are at school and in the evenings after they've gone to bed. I've also reached out to some of Mia's old colleagues, and they've been incredibly supportive. A few of them have offered to be references for me, and one even helped me update my resume. It's bittersweet. These were people I used to see at company picnics and holiday parties, and now they're helping me find a job because Mia is gone. It's still a struggle every day. There are moments when I feel overwhelmed, when I look at the boys and see Mia's eyes or smile, and it hits me all over again that she's gone. But we're finding our new normal. Last night, as I was tucking the boys into bed, Ethan asked if we could visit the park where Mia used to take them on Saturdays. It hurt, but it also felt good to remember those happy times. We're going to go this weekend. I'm more determined than ever to be the father Ethan and Noah deserve. Mia and I may not have planned for this, but I know she'd be proud of how we're managing. We're going to be okay. Update 2. It's been 3 months since my last update, and I wish I could say things have gotten easier, but life seems determined to throw more challenges our way. About a month ago, Jen reached out to apologize. She said she had started grief counseling and realized how inappropriate her behavior had been. She asked if we could start rebuilding our relationship. I was cautious but agreed to let her see the boys in supervised settings. We started with short visits at our house. Jen would come over for dinner once a week, and we'd all play board games or watch a movie together. It was awkward at first, but slowly things started to feel more normal. The boys were thrilled to have their aunt back in their lives, especially when she resumed their piano lessons. Things were going well for a few weeks. Jen seemed to be respecting my boundaries, and there were moments when it felt like we were becoming a family again. She even helped me repaint the boys' room. We kept Mia's forest mural, but updated the rest of the walls to reflect the boys' current interests. But then, last week, everything fell apart again. I got a call from the boys' school in the middle of my work shift. Ethan had a severe asthma attack, and when they tried to use his inhaler, they discovered it was empty. I was horrified. I always make sure to check their inhalers and keep extras at school. I rushed to the school, my heart pounding the entire way. When I got there, I found Jen in the nurse's office with Ethan. She was hysterical, apologizing over and over. Ethan was pale and shaky but okay. The school nurse had been able to use a nebulizer to help him breathe. It turns out Jen had picked the boys up from school the day before with my permission and taken them to the park. Ethan had a mild attack and they used up his inhaler. Jen promised she'd tell me so I could refill it, but she forgot. She was so ashamed that she didn't say anything, hoping I'd check it myself before the boys went to school. I was furious. Not only had Jen put Ethan's life at risk, but she had also broken my trust again. In the heat of the moment, I told her she was no longer welcome in our lives. I said some harsh things that I'm not proud of, but I was scared and angry. The next day, I received a letter from a lawyer. Jen and my parents are suing for grandparents' rights and custody of the boys. They're claiming that I'm an unfit parent, using the asthma incident and the previous CPS report as evidence. I'm devastated and terrified. I can't lose my boys. They're all I have left of Mia, and more importantly, they're my whole world. I've contacted a family lawyer, and we're preparing to fight this, but I'm worried. What if the judge sees me as an inadequate parent? What if they think the boys would be better off with Jen and their grandparents? To make matters worse, my work-from-home job has been struggling. The company is downsizing, and I'm worried about losing my income right when I need it most for legal fees. I've been applying for other jobs, but it's hard to find something that allows me the flexibility to take care of the boys. The boys can sense that something is wrong. They've been asking about Aunt Jen and why they can't see her. I'm trying to shield them from the legal battle, but it's hard. Noah has started having nightmares, and Ethan's asthma seems to be flaring up more often, probably due to stress. Last night, I found Noah sitting in Mia's old office, looking at photos of her on her computer. He asked me if Mommy would be mad at him for missing Aunt Jen. It broke my heart. I sat with him, and we looked through the photos together, talking about our favorite memories of Mia. I told him that Mommy would never be mad at him for his feelings, and that it's okay to miss people even when we're upset with them. I feel like I'm failing them. I'm trying so hard to be both mom and dad, to provide for them financially and emotionally, but it never seems to be enough. I miss Mia more than ever. She would know how to handle this. She always knew the right thing to say to make everything better. Our neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, has been a godsend through all of this. She's a retired teacher who lives next door and has been helping me with the boys after school. She's offered to testify on my behalf if the custody case goes to court. It means a lot to know that someone sees how hard I'm trying. I'm not giving up, though. These are my boys, and I'm going to fight with everything I have to keep our family together. I just hope it's enough. Update 3. It's been 6 weeks since my last update, and I'm relieved to say that things have finally taken a turn for the better. The custody battle with Jen and my parents went to court. It was a grueling process that lasted for several days. I had to sit there and listen as Jen and her lawyer painted me as an incompetent parent, bringing up every mistake I'd made since Mia's death. They talked about the asthma incident, the CPS report, even times when I'd been late picking up the boys from school because of work. But my lawyer was amazing. She helped me stay calm and presented our case clearly. We had character witnesses. Mrs. Rodriguez, the boys' teachers, even some of Mia's old coworkers who spoke about how involved I am in the boys' lives, how they're always clean, well-fed, and happy. Mrs. Rodriguez's testimony was particularly powerful. She spoke about overhearing me reading to the boys every night, even when I was exhausted from work, and how she often saw us playing in the backyard or working on homework together. We also had evidence of all the efforts I've been making. Documentation of our counseling sessions, the boys' improved grades, even a journal I've been keeping to track Ethan's asthma symptoms and treatments. The turning point came when the judge asked to speak to Ethan and Noah privately. I was nervous, but I knew the boys would tell the truth. When they came out, Noah ran straight to me and hugged me tight. The judge didn't tell me what they said, but she looked at me with new understanding in her eyes. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. She said that while I'm not perfect, I'm a dedicated father doing my best in difficult circumstances. She criticized Jen and my in-laws for attempting to use the court system to bully me instead of working together for the boys' benefit. The judge ordered Jen and my parents to attend family counseling with us if they want to maintain a relationship with the boys. They agreed, and we've had 2 sessions so far. It's been tense, but I'm hopeful that we can rebuild some trust for the sake of the boys. On the work front, I got some unexpected good news. One of Mia's old colleagues reached out with a job offer. It's an entry-level position in the tech company Mia used to work for, with flexible hours and the option to work from home when needed. The salary is much better than my current job, and there's room for growth. I start next month, and I'm both excited and nervous. The boys are doing better too. We've settled into a good routine, and they're opening up more about their feelings. Last week, Noah told me he was proud of me for fighting the bad guys in court. It made me realize that even though I've tried to shield them, they understand more than I give them credit for. We still have tough days. Sometimes I still reach for my phone to text Mia about something funny the boys did, only to remember she's gone. The boys still have moments where they break down crying, missing their mom, but we're learning to navigate this new normal together. I know we have a long road ahead of us, but for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about our future. Mia would be proud of how far we've come, and I'm determined to keep moving forward, for the boys and for her memory. Thank you all for your support throughout this journey. Your advice and kind words have been a lifeline during the darkest times. We're going to be okay. Now on to the next story. Story 3. Supported my depressed husband, who claimed to love his coworker. He moved out with our daughter, and he now blames me for our divorce. Me, 38F, and husband, 38M, married since 2009, and we have a preteen daughter. The last 3 years have been really tough on us because of my husband's bad working conditions that started to affect his mental health. I noticed signs of burnout and depression and brought up these concerns regularly to him. He was very dismissive and refused to see his situation and refused therapy. He started becoming distant and often isolated himself and was regularly butting heads with our daughter. He eventually told me that he had met a woman at work. Their relationship was not, according to him, physical, but he was in love with her and felt that she was his soulmate and best friend. He said he was very sorry and that he could not decide which woman he would ultimately be happiest with. He spoke out about this at home whilst I was having the toughest time of my life. I cried alone over my dreams and plans, everything we had together. He also told me that in order to clear his head, he would need to leave the house and spend some time on his own. That coworker had offered him her spare room, and he was going to take it. I asked for his help organizing the rest of the school year as I was commuting, and I promised him that as soon as the school year was over, I would look for an apartment closer to my work, and me and our daughter would move out and he could have the house to himself for his healing. I found an apartment almost immediately, and we moved. He visited us one weekend a month and brought his chaos with him every time. The new home had become a safe haven that we cherished, and he took it over as soon as he appeared, and it felt like I wasn't breathing until he finally left. After 6 months of living like this, I decided I had given things enough time to mend, and they had not. I was still hurt and bitter, and he was still coy about what was going on and what his ultimate decision really was. I told him I was done living like this and that I wanted a divorce. He absolutely lost it and left and drove back to our old house in the middle of the night just to get away from me. A week later, He told me the coworker is pregnant, and he was angry that I didn't want to even try to fix our marriage. Since then, he has gotten increasingly more hostile and accusatory in his communication with me. He blames me for breaking up the marriage and abandoning him during his crisis. He says he was not himself and has no idea why he did the things he did, but that I was the one who left. He claims I was no help when he needed me and that I had clearly mentally abandoned our relationship long before, more than 3 years prior. He tells me I'm cold and calculating and clearly not the person he thought I was. I understand that he is not well. He finally did go to therapy. I explained a lot of his actions with that in mind at first, so I did. He claims I am taking his daughter away and leaving. Update 1. The divorce is in process, and I have not seen him in person for some 4 months at this point. He mostly keeps radio silence until it seems he has to unload some hurt on me. I've kept my contact to him to a minimum, only ever messaging him about things regarding our daughter or requesting him to react to official paperwork or to his electricity bills that I've transferred to him due to the circumstances in which we started this separation originally. I paid most of his living expenses, mainly since I have a steady job and get paid double his salary. He is still very much incapacitated by his mental health issues, and I wanted to alleviate some of the practical matters for him now that we are pulling everything apart. He has been, maybe purposefully, making this into a very slow and frustrating process. Currently, I still pay for his electricity, and he reimburses those bills for me at the end of each month. Sometimes he needs encouraging. Usually this leads to him messaging me all day, usually complaints on how I'm now raising our daughter now that I have made him obsolete. His words, telling me to get a new dad to help me with the job as soon as possible. He seems to try very hard to push my buttons by saying things like, "It must be very hard for you to send your daughter to someone who you loathe and hate so much, and if I make the mistake of losing my temper, even for one curse word, he will turn immediately and tell me to calm down, stop spitting acid, and maybe we should continue our discussion when I'm not so wound up." I have mainly chosen to not engage in these conversations when they start going off the rails. I have all of his outbursts in writing. I'm also currently under the impression that the coworker is not interested in a relationship with him anymore, and all of those who asked, yes, the baby is, by his own word. He still has not told our daughter about any of it. I have chosen to give him an ultimatum on the matter. I will bring it up one more time when we have our official meeting with our child welfare officer next month. That's the official route where we live, and if he still refuses, I will take it to myself to tell our daughter the truth. So many of you have encouraged me to do this for her sake, and for the sake of our relationship, and I thank you for sharing your experiences with me. I have also contacted her school therapist and the curator and informed them of the issues she is facing now and the ones still to come. I'm hoping they will offer her some scheduled help since I know she is shy about telling me everything. She is the most important thing in my life, and as sorry as I am for her having to go through this essentially because of my choices, I refuse to take all the blame now, and I'm ready to shift it where it belongs. Personally, I'm a much happier person these days. I feel bursts of gratefulness and true happiness these days just by watching her eat her dinner and talk to me about her day at the dinner table in our clean and peaceful home. Even my houseplants are thriving, as silly as it sounds. I have finally opened up about all of this to some of my friends and my siblings, and they have all been super supportive. My siblings were clearly shocked, but both did bring up that they are somehow not surprised it all went this way. They seem to have seen things a bit more clearly from afar, just like this community did. Update 2. I took a lot of it to heart and made good progress for my daughter and myself. I finally separated the rest of our finances, stopped paying his bills, and made official agreements on child support and custody, which remained shared for now, as he went back on his word to give it to me uncontested. He did not agree to sign an official visitation agreement because he cannot commit to it right now. I offered him every other weekend and half of all holidays. He has started to meet our daughter more often though, since nowadays she actually visits him on her own free will. It seems that their relationship has gotten a bit better lately, which I'm, of course, happy about. He has been absolutely terrible towards me though. He started a campaign of passive-aggressive texting after I asked him to be civil. Now every message is overly syrupy and filled with overflowing apologies. I ignored this until he decided to talk to me face to face when we went to sign the agreements. He told me his therapist told him to talk to me for closure and speak his mind, so he did. He once again just explained to me how hard the last year has been and how I tore the marriage apart, how he was not ready to accept this divorce and never will be, how nothing in his current life is what he wanted or asked for, and considers it an insult if I congratulated him over the upcoming baby, etc. This felt really off considering he just had moved in with her affair partner. He originally tried to hide this too and was evasive, but of course our daughter found out the next time she visited and also told me. I know it is pointless, but I felt I needed to say something too, so I told him that he completely continues to ignore all my pain and the mental work I had to do over this whole thing, and I can't help the fact that my love died in the process. He says I didn't even try. He said even my parents were more supportive of him because they had exchanged pleasantries having met briefly a few weeks prior. His coworkers were more supportive than me. I told him to look in the mirror and that his little passive-aggressive game was so obvious. Clearly it hit home because he stopped immediately after. He has also been snooping over my dating life through our daughter and is very jealous, says so, and gets very verbally aggressive over it. Now, the thing that brought me back to you here tonight is that despite my life having turned so much better in the last few months, and me and my daughter have been happier than in a long while, I fell into an unexpected hole today. He was supposed to have her over this weekend but ended up canceling. The reason he gave me was different than what he gave our daughter, so I knew he lied to someone. Yesterday he blew up on me over texts that originally started as a discussion over our daughter's visits. He started the same old song of me being so petty over such a minor thing as his affair that was apparently not even a real affair at first. He wrote that my parents were right about me being too sensitive. He knows how low of a blow this is since he has been supporting me through my issues with my parents and validating all of my gripes my whole life. You are too sensitive. I told him how low that was and that he does not get to quantify my pain, and he totally lost his marbles to the point where I had to stop reading his messages because I was afraid I would start to cry in the office this morning. Our daughter runs to me crying happy tears and jumping for joy. Her father had sent her pictures of the newly born little sister. I congratulated the new official older sister, and we gushed over the pictures a little throughout the day. My mood has just been awful. I've gotten messages from my family asking how I am because daughter, of course, told everyone, which is totally okay, but it's starting to weigh on me. I've been tired and easily irritated all of a sudden. I felt like I had no one to talk to, no one who would really understand, someone unbiased, an adult to talk to. Those have been my hardest moments in all of this. I lost my best friend when we fell apart, and whenever I feel like I really need to open up and spill my heart, it reminds me of how alone I feel. Is it a normal reaction? I've been fine and very emotionally cut off from him for so long, and somehow the birth of this baby sent me into this sudden nosedive today. I felt like I needed to tell all of this in my lowest point in a long while. Update 3. First of all, to everyone who offered help and advice or just reached out to give a virtual hug, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. You can find my original post and updates from my profile. They are my only posts. I remember the last time I posted I was feeling a sudden setback due to my daughter's little sister being born. My girl has been so happy over her and loves her dearly. I really hope the sisters get to keep their relationship no matter what happens with her dad. Most of my personal life is going great. I finally managed to save enough to buy us an apartment and have been busy renovating it. My work life is great. I really love my job and I got a promotion which really helped on the house hunt. And for my siblings and friends, they have truly saved me and my mental health during this journey. I'm very happy where I am in life and have no real drive to find a partner. Sometimes I do feel that I'm maybe a bit too jaded and harsh still when it comes to love. I don't like that, but I guess it too will heal over time. All this hurts my ex, as I get to hear after he hears from these things from our daughter. He wrote to me that it feels like he was dragging me back, and his absence has now allowed me to thrive. My ex-husband is not doing well, of course. All I hear of him is what he tells me and what my daughter tells me in passing. We had to make a new child support agreement as the one we made originally had a fixed period, and at that hearing I got to hear a lot about his current state of affairs, and I have to say the new woman of the house is not playing around. She has made him pay all utilities and groceries and all miscellaneous household fixes whilst she just pays her home loan. I was impressed. He did complain during the hearing that he barely has money for going to therapy as it is, and when it turned out that the child support had been miscalculated last time, the state paid for him, he went into total despair over the amounts. He started messaging me right after the hearing and implied he no longer has money for therapy, and that I should know that he is the only breadwinner in the house, and that he will not be able to have our daughter over so much now since she eats like a horse and he can't afford it. I reminded him she eats on the 26 other days of the month too, not just the 2 weekends she spends with him this summer. He agreed to have her over for a few weeks during his holiday because I agreed he wouldn't have to pay child support for that month. The situation is sad, and it's not getting better. The last straw for me came a few weeks ago when she was spending time at his place. He had already picked a fight a few days prior, but I had refused to engage, so he stormed out, meaning he left my last message unread for 3 days. The silent treatment I used to get when we were still together was exactly like this too. He clearly had been building up steam during those days, and then all of a sudden blew up my phone with message after message telling me how bad I was at this. Meaning arguing, I assumed, and twisting everything I had said into a version that made me look like a total. I once again refused to engage and told him that this no longer concerns me and he should find someone else to argue with. That angered him so that he swapped tactics and told me that he had shown our daughter these messages to prove that I am not as nice as I pretend to be. That got me from zero to furious in an instant, though not for the reasons he implied. I told him that this was hands down the most selfish thing he could have done, and that this is his daughter he is damaging with this behavior. I told him I'm absolutely done with him, and I will not be in contact with him anymore apart from issues directly related to our daughter and her matters. He then totally swapped personality, it felt like, and started with these really whiny, self-pitying, "Why are you being so mean to me?" messages that he then topped with, "I still love you," and other weird. I was no longer answering, so the last message he sent was to say that he, in fact, had not shown her any of my messages and that my sanctity was intact. I went to pick up my daughter the next day as I felt really uneasy and really needed to personally be there, and maybe I could get her to talk to me during the car ride if he had been talking his truths again. And as we took a pit stop and had some ice cream, she quietly asked me to please don't take her away from Dad. My heart absolutely broke. I asked her why would she think that, and she revealed to me that my ex-husband had told her about our custody disagreements in the form of, "Mommy wants full custody." I explained to her that even if I had full custody, it would not take away visitation if it was deemed to be good for her. She said she wanted her dad to be there for her school graduation, and I said her father has all the rights in the world to be at the school event, and all she needed to do was to make sure she invited him. I know this will now work in my favor and not his. I have invited him to her birthday parties too, and he never comes. I haven't told her this now. I made sure that she knows I'm not against any of this, and by making sure she invites him, he can now make his excuses directly to her. Part of me hates having to be in this war at all, but I feel like he leaves me no choice. A few days later, she asked me why I am so mean to Daddy. I asked her why she thinks that, and she revealed that Dad had shown her some of my messages. So yes, his last message to me was once again a lie. Now, as many of you have been warning me, this is parental alienation and downright mental abuse on her. I called the local CPS to ask for advice on how to proceed and if I should file a complaint on him and what would follow. My daughter has already been seeing the school counselor, and as she has now started in a new school, I will be seeking the same help from there too, for them to evaluate and refer her to therapy. I was told by the CPS worker that this will be documented and that I should weigh now the possible consequences. They are totally for me filing an official complaint, but as we have shared custody, what will follow is a session for both parties individually for a discussion and then evaluation on the severity of the situation. The CPS worker said that 2 things can happen. He takes it to heart because someone else brings it up, or he gets mad and makes our already strained communication even worse and possibly retaliates. Knowing him, it's the latter. They also told me that if I get more evidence on him manipulating our daughter, then I should just file anyway. Like I have mentioned before, all our communication is in writing, and I have saved all of it. So I'm currently torn between trying to figure out what kind of damage my poor daughter will have. The trauma of being cut from her father and little sister, or the trauma of being mentally manipulated against another parent and being used as ammunition in a war that is not her making. Whichever it will be, I know she will blame me, and that probably is my just punishment too. I failed to protect her. And to those who say I should not protect my ex and just tell her everything, It's not him I've been trying to protect, but her. She should not be in this situation, but I admit, due to his actions, here we are now anyway. He mocked me for being so naive that I really thought amicable co-parenting was something people can do well. I sure as can't do it alone, and children are very perceptive. She knows her father got another woman pregnant, as she puts it, but she is also being fed this weird narrative by her dad where I clocked out of that marriage years ago and was just pretending and all he needed was a hug, but I turned my back on him and abandoned him like I abandoned my parents because I just couldn't get over it like everybody else on this planet could. All his words from his rant message, and she just talked to me still, so I can verify he does really tell these things to her. So here we are. The good, the bad, and the bats hit insane. All I hope is that I can make the right decision for my daughter and that she could grow to be a healthy and happy adult. If that requires her to come to me one day and ask me to justify the things I did and said, then I'm happy to have that conversation with her. Thank you everyone for your messages, support, and criticism. She makes him pay all the bills, but when the two of you were together, you paid for most things. The crappy behaviors that you entertained throughout your marriage are now focused on you. He refuses to and harasses you because he can't take it out on her. Your daughter is old enough. It's time that you tell her the whole truth. Otherwise, he'll continue to fill your child with his lies, making you seem like the bad person. Also, get a co-parenting app to communicate through so you have all the evidence you'll need if you choose to go back to court, and only communicate about your daughter, nothing else. Now on to the next story. Story 4. My entitled wife disappeared after a girls' trip. Years later, she showed up at my doorstep with a baby, so I destroyed her life. You know how people always say things like, I never saw it coming? Well, that's exactly how it was for me. My wife and I were together for a solid 4 years, married for all of it. I honestly thought we had a good thing going. We had plans, a whole life mapped out, and for the most part, I really thought we were on the same page. Now, here's the thing, we both wanted kids, or at least I thought we both did. Right after we got married, we started talking about it seriously. She'd always say how she wanted 2 or 3 kids, kept going on about what we'd name them, how we'd decorate the nursery, the whole thing. She'd even sit online looking at baby clothes and baby gadgets, planning this life with our future kids. It was kind of our thing to talk about it, something that kept us close. So we were excited, ready to start this next chapter together, and everything seemed perfect. But then we got hit with some bad news that just knocked the wind out of me. After a few months of trying to have kids, we went to a doctor to see what was going on. Long story short, it was me. My count was way too low, and the doctor basically told us that the chances of us having kids naturally were slim to none. It was like a punch to the gut. I felt useless. All those plans we had were gone in an instant. The news hit me hard. Like really hard. I ended up in a pretty bad place for a while. Therapy eventually helped, but at the start I was a total mess. She seemed pretty supportive at first, saying it didn't matter and that she'd be happy with just the 2 of us. But even from the beginning, there was something off about how she said it. It's like she just dropped it way too quickly. One minute she was all about having a family, and the next she's saying she didn't need kids to be happy. Now, don't get me wrong, I get that people change their minds, but her whole attitude felt weird to me. She'd gone from daydreaming about baby names to just flat out avoiding any talk about kids. And not just that, it was like she started seeing me differently too. Out of nowhere, she'd make these small digs at me, stuff she'd never said before. Comments about how I wasn't taking care of myself, how maybe I should get in shape or be more productive around the house. And yeah, maybe I'd put on a few pounds, but it was like she was just finding things to blame me for. When I confronted her, asking what was up with the sudden attitude change, she'd brush it off. She'd tell me I was imagining things, that I was just being overly sensitive. But I knew something was up. The woman I married, the one who used to sit with me for hours talking about our future, she was different. She wasn't mean exactly, but there was this coldness, like she'd already checked out mentally and was just going through the motions. And over time, I guess I started to believe her when she said everything was fine. I stopped pushing because I didn't want to come across as insecure or needy. Anyway, fast forward a few years and we were just living day by day. We'd fallen into this routine where we barely talked about anything meaningful. It was like we were roommates more than husband and wife. I tried bringing up other options, adoption, surrogacy, but every time she'd shut it down, saying she didn't want to think about it. She'd say, "I'm happy as long as we're together," but I never fully bought it. It felt like she was trying to convince herself more than me. Then, out of nowhere, she tells me she wants to go on a girls' trip. Now, it wasn't unusual for her to go on trips with her friends. She'd done it a few times before, and I always supported her. We lived in Brighton, and she talked about how she wanted to go to America with her friends for a while. I didn't think twice about it because we'd built up this trust over the years, so I even helped her pack, made sure she had everything she needed, and dropped her off at the airport. I remember the last thing she said before she left. She turned to me and said, "Thank you for being so supportive." I thought it was a little weird that she'd say that. It's not like I'd done anything special, but she seemed so genuine, so I brushed it off as her just being appreciative. That night, I stayed up so I could call her once she landed, just to make sure everything went smoothly. Her flight was supposed to take about 9 hours, so I kept myself busy around the house, watching TV, checking the clock, and waiting for her to text me. She'd landed. Once I saw her flight had touched down, I gave her a call to check in. The phone rang and rang, but no answer. I figured she was tired, maybe went straight to her hotel and crashed, so I didn't think too much of it. But then morning rolled around, and I still hadn't heard from her. I started feeling this gnawing worry in the pit of my stomach. I tried calling again. Then I sent a few texts, thinking maybe she was just busy or her phone was on silent. But after a few more hours of radio silence, I was officially freaking out. I ended up calling her sister to see if maybe she'd heard from her. Nothing. By now, I was seriously starting to panic. I even went as far as calling her friends, the ones who were supposed to be on the trip with her, thinking maybe something had gone wrong with her phone or maybe she just hadn't had the chance to check in. But when I called them, they were confused too because they weren't on the trip with her. They were sitting 2 blocks away back home having coffee. That was when it really hit me. She wasn't on a girls' trip. She wasn't with friends. She hadn't gone anywhere with anyone. She was just gone. I sat there holding the phone, and it felt like my stomach dropped through the floor. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Why would she lie to me like that? Why would she just leave without telling me? I tried to convince myself it was some kind of mistake, like maybe she'd missed a connecting flight or there had been some emergency and she hadn't been able to call. But deep down, I knew she'd planned this, the whole girls' trip thing, her saying thank you for being so supportive. It was all part of whatever she'd been cooking up in her head. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was living in some nightmare where I couldn't wake up. This wasn't the woman I'd married. This was someone I didn't even recognize. All the pieces started clicking together. The coldness, the way she'd stopped talking about our future, those little jabs about my looks and my health. She'd been pulling away for a long time and I just hadn't seen it, or maybe I hadn't wanted to see it. That night, I just sat there staring at my phone, hoping for a text, a call, anything, but nothing came, and deep down I knew it wouldn't. Waking up the next morning, I remember just lying there staring at the ceiling, hoping maybe it was all some messed up dream, but her side of the bed was empty, and reality hit hard. She'd actually left. She'd packed her bags and vanished. And all those reassurances I'd told myself the night before, that maybe she was delayed or her phone died, they didn't hold up anymore. It was obvious she'd planned this and wanted out. The first few days, I was in total denial. I'd keep calling her phone, hoping I'd hear her voice on the other end, maybe get an explanation. I even left messages. I didn't know what to say half the time, but I kept leaving them, hoping something would get through to her. But all I got was silence, which somehow made it feel worse. It's like I was left to figure it out on my own, with no idea what went wrong, like I was a stranger to her all along. At first, her family was as shocked as I was. Her mom didn't know anything about her plans, and they hadn't heard from her either. I ended up going over there more times than I could count, talking to her mom, looking for answers. I think they felt bad for me. Her mom would let me crash there some nights, even made me meals when I couldn't bring myself to cook. She'd sit there listening to me talk about all the little things that didn't make sense, trying to piece together how my life had blown up without warning. And I'll be honest, sometimes I just sat there in silence, too numb to say anything. I went from one extreme to another. Anger, sadness, guilt. I'd keep asking myself what I did wrong. Did I miss some sign? Did I not give her enough attention? There were days I'd go over every conversation we'd had, every fight, trying to figure out what pushed her to leave. I kept running through my mind how I might have saved our marriage, what I could have done differently. I know it sounds dramatic, but I was obsessed with figuring it out, like finding an answer could somehow fix everything. I barely ate, barely slept, and my work started slipping, too. People noticed. They'd ask if I was okay, and I'd just shrug it off, say I was dealing with personal stuff. It was embarrassing to admit what had happened, to say out loud that my wife left me without a word. Eventually, I did tell a couple of close friends, and they did their best to keep me distracted, dragging me out to hang out, trying to get me to move on. But even when I was with them, I'd be in my head, thinking about her, wondering where she was and why I wasn't enough to make her stay. One of the worst parts was the constant questions from people who didn't know. Neighbors, family, friends, even old coworkers who'd heard I was married, would ask, "How's married life treating you? How's your wife?" Every time it was like ripping off a fresh scab. I didn't have the guts to tell them she'd left, so I'd just smile, say everything was fine, but that lie felt heavier every time I told it. Therapy ended up being the only thing that helped. I'd never gone before, but after a few months of barely functioning, I knew I couldn't handle it on my own anymore, so I found a therapist and started going every week, talking to someone neutral, someone who didn't know her or me or any of our baggage. It helped. I'd vent about the anger, the betrayal, the hole she'd left in my life. I'd go on about the sleepless nights, how I'd lie awake replaying everything over and over. The therapist helped me see that there was no magic moment that would have kept her here. She made the choice to leave, and that was on her, not me. That was a hard pill to swallow. For the longest time, I felt like there was something wrong with me, that I'd somehow driven her away. But slowly, I started seeing things differently. She'd been cold and distant for a long time, and I just ignored it, hoping things would get better on their own. I'd convinced myself that I could hold it all together, that somehow my effort alone was enough to keep our marriage alive. It was painful to accept that it wasn't. As time went on, I started taking small steps to rebuild my life. I'd lost a lot of myself in our marriage, and I hadn't realized it until she left. I'd always been the guy who made an effort, who'd go out of his way to make sure she was happy, to make sure our home life was comfortable. But now I had all this time on my hands, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I started picking up old hobbies again, stuff I'd forgotten about. I went to the gym, started reading books I'd been putting off, even tried cooking new recipes. Work eventually got better, too. At first, I was just going through the motions, barely keeping up with my workload, but as I started feeling more like myself, I put more effort into my job. It was one of the few things that made me feel accomplished, like I still had control over something in my life. I'd always been good at what I did, but now I put my all into it. The extra hours, the focus. It paid off in the form of a promotion that I never would have gotten if I'd been wallowing in self-pity. Still, there were days that hurt. Every once in a while, I'd come across something that reminded me of her. A photo, an old movie ticket stub, little things that brought back memories I tried to forget. I'd look at them and wonder what she was doing, if she ever thought about me, if she ever regretted what she did. But those moments started to fade, bit by bit. Each time I was able to pack away those memories a little quicker, move on a little easier. I also reconnected with friends I hadn't seen much since I got married. We started doing things again, hitting up the golf range, going on hikes, stuff I hadn't done in years. It felt good to have people in my corner, people who weren't part of the mess, who could help me move on without dragging me back into the pain. Looking back, I realized I'd put way too much of myself into that relationship, into being her husband. When she left, it felt like she'd taken a part of me with her, like I'd lost this huge chunk of who I was. But piece by piece, I was finding myself again. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but I was getting there. By the end of that year, I could finally look in the mirror and see someone who wasn't defined by what she'd done. I was more than just the guy whose wife left him. I'd survived, I'd rebuilt, and I'd come out stronger. For the first time in years, I felt like I could actually live my life without her shadow hanging over me. And honestly, I was proud of that. I thought I'd put everything behind me. Life had finally started feeling normal again, or at least as close to normal as it could get after all that mess. I had my routine down, friends keeping me busy, and work was actually going great. I'd even stopped thinking about her every day. I mean, I still had my moments where some random memory would sneak up on me, but it wasn't like before, where every second of my life was somehow connected to her. So when there was a knock on my door one Saturday morning, she was the last person I expected to see standing there. But there she was, right on my doorstep, holding a baby. I froze. My brain just stopped working for a second because it was like seeing a ghost. She looked pretty much the same, maybe a little worn down, but still her. She gave me this look like she actually thought I'd be happy to see her. And yeah, that hit me hard because I thought I was past caring. Turns out, seeing her again stirred up a lot of emotions I thought I'd buried. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there staring. She smiled at me like nothing had happened. And then, with zero shame, she asked, "Can I come in?" The nerve. I mean, really? After everything she'd done, she just shows up here like I'm supposed to welcome her back with open arms. But I kept my cool. Told her, "No, you can stay right there," and explain. I didn't want her in my house, bringing all that chaos back into the place I'd built up again, the one space I'd made mine. She looked a bit thrown off, but she stayed where she was and just dove into her story. She started with, "I know this might be a shock, but I wanted to come back and explain everything." She even had this hopeful look on her face, as if she genuinely believed I'd be open to hearing her out. I was torn between laughing in her face and just shutting the door right there, but I was too curious. I wanted to know what her excuse was, what she'd come up with to justify the way she'd vanished. She went on talking about how she'd made a mistake leaving, how she'd realized she'd lost the best thing that had ever happened to her words, not mine. She said she'd spent a lot of time reflecting, and that after having this baby, she finally understood what really mattered in life. Apparently, what really mattered was showing up unannounced at my door after ghosting me for years. And that's when she looked down at the baby and said, "This is our second chance." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Our second chance? Like this kid was supposed to be some magical reset button, and we just pick up right where we left off. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was absolutely fuming. She went on saying how she wanted us to be a family again, that she'd made a terrible mistake, but now we could start fresh, just the three of us. Finally, I asked the one question that had been eating at me since she showed up. "Why did you leave?" I kept my voice as steady as I could, but I wasn't sure how much longer I'd be able to hold back. I'd spent years trying to understand, torturing myself with all the possibilities, and now that she was here, I needed to hear it from her. She hesitated, looking down at her feet like she was ashamed, but eventually, she told me the truth, or what I assume was the truth. She admitted she'd left because she wanted a kid, and since I couldn't give her one, she'd found someone who could. She actually said it like it was no big deal, as if she hadn't shattered my life, as if I was supposed to just nod and accept it. She explained that the guy she'd left with didn't stick around, but by then she'd had the baby and realized she wanted me back. Just like that, simple. I took a minute to process what she was saying. Here she was, admitting that she'd abandoned me, ran off with some guy, had his kid, and now expected me to be okay with it like I just forgive and forget. I told her, "So you left, found someone else, had his baby, and now you think you can come back and pretend like nothing happened?" She started crying, saying she was sorry, that she'd made a huge mistake, but that didn't move me at all. She kept saying how she realized that I was the one she truly loved and that we were meant to be together. Honestly, it was hard to keep a straight face. I couldn't believe how delusional she sounded. This wasn't love. This was desperation, and I could see it all over her face. Then she tried to guilt-trip me, going on about how it wasn't easy being a single mom, how hard it had been for her. She actually tried to make herself the victim in all this, as if her choices hadn't led to exactly where she was now. She told me she needed my support, that she was ready to make things work this time. The whole time I just kept thinking, who does she think I am? I stood there taking it all in, but at this point I was done listening. I told her straight up, "You made your choice a long time ago, and now you have to live with it. There's no second chance here." She looked stunned, like she'd never even considered that I'd say no. Like she really thought she could just waltz back into my life because it was convenient for her. And then, just when I thought she'd finally get it and leave, she got mad. Her tone changed, and she started yelling at me, saying I was being selfish, that I owed her a chance to make things right. She said that if she'd wanted to, she could have divorced me back then and taken half of everything. She even had the nerve to bring up the house, saying it should still be hers. It was like her true colors were coming out right in front of me, and I felt this wave of relief. I was finally seeing her for who she really was. I didn't argue with her. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at her and said, "We're done. You wanted a different life and now you have it. This isn't my responsibility anymore." With that, I shut the door in her face, cutting off whatever final words she had left. Standing there, hearing her muffled shouts from the other side of the door, I felt this strange calm wash over me. She could knock, yell, cry, whatever, but I knew I'd never let her back in. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd married, she was gone. And in her place was the stranger who thought she could pick up the pieces when it suited her. I walked away from the door and sat down, feeling lighter than I had in years. After I slammed the door on her, I thought that was it. I figured she'd get the message and just leave. But no, instead she started banging on the door, yelling all kinds of things. I couldn't believe the nerve. There I was, in the one place that was mine, the one place I'd managed to rebuild from the mess she'd left me in, and she had the audacity to stand there demanding I listen to her. At first, I thought about ignoring it, just letting her scream until she got tired, but then I got curious. I wanted to hear what kind of reasons she'd come up with this time. So I opened the door just a crack, enough to show her that I was listening but not letting her in. She looked like she'd just taken a slap to the face, probably shocked that I hadn't given her the reaction she wanted. She launched into this whole monologue about how she was willing to forgive me for slamming the door on her and how she was ready to start fresh, like we were just having a normal spat, not dealing with her abandonment. She kept going on about how we could make things work if we both put in the effort. At that point, I couldn't hold back. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because the sheer nerve of this woman was beyond anything I'd ever seen. She looked furious when I did that, like I was supposed to feel bad for not taking her seriously. I told her, "You left. You had your chance and you threw it all away. I'm not just going to pretend none of that happened because you feel like it." Her face went red, and she started saying things like, "You don't understand how hard it was for me." She went on about how she'd been so lost after leaving and how she'd realized too late that she'd made a mistake. But I wasn't buying it. I told her that leaving was a choice she made. She had planned it, lied about it, and then went through with it. Her regret didn't mean anything now. And that's when she snapped. Her whole tone changed. She dropped the sad, remorseful act and started going off on me, saying how I was being unfair, how I didn't have the decency to give her another chance. She actually had the guts to say, "If I'd wanted to, I could have taken everything from you back then. I could have taken half of everything you own." I just stood there amazed. This woman who'd left me without a word now thought she was entitled to some kind of reward for not trying to ruin me financially. Like she deserved credit for not being as terrible as she could have been. I told her, "So what? Am I supposed to be grateful? Grateful that you only ditched me and didn't take my stuff with you?" She stared at me, her face a mix of anger and something else. Maybe desperation, maybe guilt. But honestly, by that point, I didn't care. I was just done. All those years I'd spent feeling guilty, questioning myself, wondering if I was somehow responsible for her leaving. They melted away right there. I finally saw her for who she was, and it felt like the weight I'd been carrying around was finally lifted. She wasn't done, though. She started pacing on my porch, ranting about how I'd never find anyone like her, and how I'd regret not giving her another chance. She actually tried to make me feel like I was the one who was missing out by not taking her back. It was bizarre. Here she was, the one who destroyed everything we had, acting like I should be begging her to stay. When she saw that I wasn't budging, she got even louder, going on about how I'd forced her to leave in the first place. She claimed that if I'd been more understanding about the whole kid thing, none of this would have happened. Apparently, according to her logic, my inability to give her a child meant I had failed her as a husband, which somehow justified her running off to have one with someone else. The mental gymnastics were impressive, honestly. I couldn't believe she was trying to pin her choices on me. I told her flat out, "Look, if you wanted a kid that badly, you could have told me the truth. You didn't have to lie to my face and pretend everything was fine while planning your exit. She had nothing to say to that, just stared at me like I'd slapped her. But I didn't let her get a word in. I went on telling her, you made that choice all on your own, and now you've got to live with it. That's not my problem. She tried one last angle, switching back to her sad face, asking me to think about the child and how I was being unfair by turning my back on him. She had the kid in her arms, and she actually used him to guilt-trip me, like I was the bad guy here. But I wasn't falling for it. I told her, I don't know that child. I have nothing to do with him. He's not mine, and neither are you, and that was it. I could see the realization finally sinking in for her. She knew I wasn't going to change my mind, that there was no way I'd let her back into my life. I could see the anger fading, replaced by something else. Maybe actual regret, maybe just frustration, but it didn't matter to me. She was just a stranger now, a stranger who had tried to walk all over me and expected me to smile and thank her for it. She stood there for a few more seconds, like she was waiting for me to change my mind, to call her back. But I didn't say another word. I just stood there watching her face as it finally dawned on her that I meant every word. Then, without another look, I shut the door, and this time I didn't wait for her to bang on it again. I knew deep down that I'd made my decision, and there was no going back. I walked away from the door feeling, I don't know, like I'd finally won. She'd spent so much time thinking she could come back and manipulate her way into my life again. But it was over. I was free. There wasn't going to be a second chance. Not for her, not for us. She was just a memory now, one I'd finally put in the past where it belonged. After all those years of guilt and pain, I finally felt like I could breathe again. And you know what? Felt good. The moment I closed that door on her, I felt that strange calm wash over me. I wasn't angry or sad or even shocked anymore. It was like every ounce of energy I'd spent on her for years. All the regret, the guilt, the endless wondering. It just vanished. I'd finally gotten the closure I didn't know I needed, and I was ready to move forward. It was over for real this time. But of course, things didn't end as cleanly as I hoped. A few days later, I got a text from her mom. She was apologizing, saying she was ashamed of how her daughter had handled everything and that she tried to talk some sense into her. But obviously it hadn't worked. Her mom was a good person. She'd helped me out a lot after her daughter left, and I could tell she was genuinely upset about the whole thing. I didn't hold anything against her, but I wasn't interested in being roped back into that mess. I just replied with a polite, thanks for checking in, and left it at that. I wasn't going to give her mom any more details, and I wasn't going to waste time explaining my decision. She understood enough to know it was over. Over the next few weeks, I heard bits and pieces through mutual friends and social media. Apparently, she'd gone back to living with her parents, and it wasn't going smoothly. The guy she'd left me for, the kid's father, wasn't involved at all. He'd completely bailed. I guess he hadn't signed up for the long haul, and now she was stuck figuring it out on her own. She'd pretty much burned every bridge, so there weren't many people willing to lend a hand. Her old friends, the ones who were on my side when she first disappeared, had no sympathy for her. They'd all moved on and weren't too keen on getting dragged back into her drama. Can't blame them. Her parents weren't exactly thrilled either. They weren't in a great financial position to support her and a baby. I knew this because not long after the text from her mom, I got a call from her dad. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the best of me. He was polite but direct, said they were struggling to make ends meet, and hinted that maybe I could help out a bit. He said, "We know you cared about her once," and kept going on about the baby and how hard things were for them. I listened politely, but when he started going on about how his daughter just needs a little support to get back on her feet, I couldn't help but laugh a little. Not out loud, but you get the point. I told him, as nicely as I could, that his daughter's choices were her own, and that I wasn't in any position or mindset to help. I think he got the message because he didn't press further. The next thing I know, her friends start reaching out. People I hadn't heard from in years. A few tried the guilt angle, saying she was going through a rough time and that maybe I could find it in my heart to give her another chance. Another friend of hers even had the nerve to suggest that the kid needed a father figure and that I shouldn't let my bitterness get in the way of helping him out. But I stood my ground. I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel bad for finally choosing myself after years of feeling like I'd never be enough. I'd given that woman everything I had, and she'd thrown it away. The least she could do was own her choices instead of expecting me to bail her out. Over time, the calls and messages slowed down, and eventually they stopped altogether. It was like everyone finally understood that I was serious, that I'd moved on and wasn't going to be roped back in. And that's when the real peace set in. My life felt quiet, normal in a way it hadn't in years. I had my routines, my friends, my work. It wasn't a fancy, glamorous life, but it was mine, and I'd built it back up on my terms. The funny thing is, I started finding happiness in the little things again. Stuff I hadn't really noticed when I was married. I'd go for walks, cook my own meals, read books I'd meant to get to for years. The freedom was refreshing, and I realized I didn't need anyone's permission to live the way I wanted. For once, I wasn't constantly worried about someone else's approval or happiness. It was like I'd gotten my life back, piece by piece. Every now and then, I'd run into someone who knew both of us, and they'd ask, "Hey, whatever happened with her?" I'd give a brief, polite answer and change the subject. It wasn't that I was hiding anything. I just didn't want to keep revisiting a chapter that was so clearly over. She was part of my past, and I'd finally learned how to leave her there. As for her, last I heard, things weren't going great. She was struggling to keep a job, still bouncing between her parents' place and friends' couches when she wore out her welcome. People I barely talked to anymore would message me occasionally, telling me she was asking for help from just about anyone who'd listen. Some of them even hinted that she was hoping I'd change my mind, that maybe I'd come around and decide to play dad to her kid after all. But that wasn't going to happen. I'd spent too much time and energy getting my life back to even think about going down that road. I wasn't going to be her safety net, wasn't going to be the guy who picks up the pieces just because things didn't work out the way she planned. I was done with that chapter, and nothing was going to drag me back in. In the end, I feel like I got the closure I needed. She'd made her choices, and now she was dealing with the consequences. And me? I finally felt free, truly, genuinely free in a way I hadn't felt since the day she left. I was done letting her shadow hang over my life. I'd moved on, and I was content. Not happy in some big, dramatic way, but quietly, peacefully content. And you know what? That was enough. Now on to the next story. Story 5. I brought my family dog to live with me and my roommate, who adores him, but now my boyfriend demands I get rid of him. I live in a house with one roommate, 23F, who is also my best friend. Over the summer, 2 things happened. Needless to say, things got hectic, and I moved back in with my family for a couple of months to help take care of the dog and try to provide some stability for my brother. My sick dog had to be put to sleep, which was really hard. My mother also had to find a new place since she could not afford the old house on her salary alone. She finds the perfect house, but the landlord did not allow pets. My landlord does, however, and after clearing it with my roommate, I decide to bring Galahad, 7M, home with me. I've always loved Galahad, but since he's moved in, we're pretty inseparable. Nothing makes me smile like this little dog. My roommate adores him, and we often joke that he is our child. My friends love him too, as he is very cute and tends to charm everyone. Everyone except my boyfriend, it seems. My boyfriend was never very keen on Galahad. I guess cordial is the best word if you can apply that to a relationship with a dog. I always assumed it was because he is a cat person, 2 cats at his place, and it never really bothered me until last weekend. I'm planning on going to a dog Halloween party hosted by the Humane Society. My roommate is going too, and we are dressing up as medieval maidens, and Galahad is going to be a knight. I was excitedly telling my boyfriend about this and showing him our costumes when he freaks out. He said Galahad shouldn't be around other dogs, or even strange humans because of his behavioral problems. I was surprised because Galahad gets along great with dogs and people and has never shown aggressive behavior. My boyfriend ranted for a while, but here's a condensed version. My boyfriend lists all the problems, including that I am too obsessed with Galahad, and ending with he thinks I need to send Galahad back to live with my family. I explain why that is not an option. He said he didn't want to come to my house anymore while Galahad is still here. I asked him if that was an ultimatum, and he told me to take it how I wished. This week our communication has been the bare minimum, and my boyfriend still seems very upset with me. My roommate is furious about it. I just want to smooth things over. Should I take Galahad to a dog training class? I don't have the money for a personal dog trainer. I think Galahad is just being a normal dog for the most part. Am I in the wrong? I'm so confused. Update 1. I got a couple of questions asking if I was minimizing Galahad's behavior, and I think I was mainly the barking thing. Galahad only barks a couple of times at people entering the house. But he is loud. It can be startling to people who aren't familiar with him. Also, the wanting to be watched while eating. I think I downplayed it because I managed to work it into my routine easily, and I have a lot of guilt over him dropping so much weight. This isn't normal behavior though and needs to be corrected. With that in mind, I decided Galahad should be enrolled in a dog training class, and hopefully I could address his other behaviors with a professional. I planned to tell this to my boyfriend on Halloween and hope it would all work out well. Didn't. I texted my boyfriend Halloween morning that I wanted to come to his place and talk before or after the Humane Society Halloween party. He didn't respond, so me, my roommate, and Galahad got costumed up and went to the party. It was a blast, and I could tell Galahad enjoyed some canine company. On the way back to the house, my boyfriend calls me and asks me to come over so we can talk. I tell him I have to drop off my roommate and Galahad first, then I would be right over. He just hangs up. I get to his apartment, and I can tell he's pissed. He asks why I haven't gotten rid of Galahad. I tell him I'm not getting rid of my dog and about taking him to classes. My boyfriend says that's not good enough. We fight for a while. Neither of us would bend. We ended up breaking up. I get back home, and my roommate can tell I've been crying. So we spend the night watching Bill and Ted, drinking wine, and calling my ex-boyfriend a medieval dickweed. I'm lucky to have such a great friend. Update 2. So last Saturday I got a surprise visit from my ex. I asked my roommate to watch Galahad in another room while I talked to my ex. He actually showed up with a box of dog treats. They were for large dogs, so they were way too big for Galahad. But it was a really sweet gesture. We chit-chat about various things for a couple of minutes. Then my ex apologizes, says he misses me, and that he wants me back. As much as I've played tough in my posts, I really love this guy, and breaking up has been hard. We started to talk about how we could make it work. He proposed that we could hang out at his apartment, and if he came over to my house, Galahad would be put in a different room than us. I told him I needed time to think and that I wasn't ready to jump back into official status just yet. His demeanor completely changed. He got quiet for a second, then said, "What the?" His voice got angry, not sure if I would say raised, and he went on about how I should just accept his apology, that he was doing everything to make this relationship work and I was purposely sabotaging it. I could feel tears welling up, and he said, "Now you're going to cry." My roommate walked into the room, living room/kitchen, and went to get something from the fridge. My ex took this as his cue, I guess, and got up and left without saying anything else to me. So, to pull a Taylor Swift, we are never ever getting back together. Since then, I've blocked him on all social media except Instagram, where I've been posting pictures of Galahad. It's petty, but it makes me feel better. In other news, I've been training Galahad to eat by himself. Mixed success so far, but slow and steady wins the race. Now on to the next story. Story 6. Caught my wife cheating when we connected her phone to our new TV, and it turns out she lost her job for leaking info, and now she's being investigated. A bit of background. We've been married for 22 years, and we have one son, 19. Like any marriage, we've had scuffles here and there, but nothing that we haven't been able to get over. In fact, I felt we had a great marriage with great communication, mutual attraction, and a satisfying sex life. We both share a love for the outdoors, so we were constantly on the go and staying active, hiking, camping, or just taking long walks. We've always taken care of ourselves and made an effort to stay in pretty good shape, because we talked about growing old together and being able to do things when we're old and gray. I work as a paramedic, and over the last 9 months, my shifts had gotten a bit twist-turned around. I've had to work mainly night shifts and picked up a lot of extra shifts. She works as a litigation consultant and has been working from home for a little less than a year. When my wife made the transition to WFH, it wasn't her idea. Her firm actually moved towards liquid talent, and she told me everyone started working from home. But I remember her making a big stink about it and how she wasn't going to be able to see her clients/colleagues face-to-face as much, which makes building relationships and trust so hard. I remember her being strongly against it, and so much so that she was debating on leaving her work. Trust. How ironic. Remember this for later. Anyway, my night shifts made things a bit distant between us, since our schedules suddenly didn't really overlap anymore. Although she'd be at home working, I'd be sleeping. When I'd be getting ready to go to work, I thought she was settling in for the night and getting ready for bed. But when we were both off at the same time, or our schedules mashed up nicely, we seemed to be just fine. We were close. We played around. We had fun with each other. There was nothing out of the ordinary, or anything that tipped me off that anything was going on behind my back. Our marriage felt fine. She'd talk to me about her week. She'd text me during the day while I was sleeping, telling me that she missed me or she saw something funny and thought of me. She made me meals that I'd eat when I woke up, and she'd pack me lunch. Recently, my brother came over to help me install a Chromecast I got through a contest at work. It happened to be a random day off I had, and my brother was in town from a shift. I hadn't seen him in a while, so I decided to ask him for some help with this. We were having fun, taking turns connecting our phones to the TV and watching videos and listening to music, just messing around. My wife comes out from her office after she was done with work, and she asks what we're doing. I tell her that he's helping connect my phone to the TV for our new Chromecast. I ask her if she wants my brother to help her download the app on her phone so she can use it too, and she hesitates at first and looks at the TV and then looks back at me. I'm like, it's super simple. You just have to download an app. Takes like 2 seconds. Finally, she caves, but it looks like she's texting someone or going through her phone right before she passes it to my brother. At the time, I didn't really think anything of this. My brother starts going through the process of connecting her phone and getting it recognized, and she asks how long it's going to take. My brother says something like, maybe 2 minutes, and she's like, okay, I'm just going to go to the washroom quick. Before she walks away, she turns back around and says, you're just downloading an app, right? And he's like, yeah. So she leaves to go to the washroom, and my brother and I are having drinks on the couch, and we're not really paying attention while he's going through these easy steps to connect the thing. Not even 10 seconds after that, he connects her phone to the screen, and as a joke, he opens up her messages. There's a contact that's named just a heart emoji. He looks at me and starts laughing, thinking that he's going to find something juicy in there between her and I. I'm like, viewer discretion advised, and he starts scrolling through this thread and sees some pretty raunchy things being said back and forth. He's calling me cheeky and a dirty dog and saying things like he didn't know I had it in me. I will say it wasn't beyond my wife and I to say some pretty interesting things to one another while she was getting ready for bed and I was just starting my shift. So at first, I did think that this was a message thread between the two of us. But as I'm looking closer at the thread, I'm realizing that this isn't between me and my wife. At one point, she starts calling this guy Craig. At another point, there's some nude exchanges, and let's just say that the male extremity definitely wasn't mine. My brother sees my reaction and he starts scrolling through slowly this time, trying to read whatever he can, and then realizes the same thing. My stomach dropped, and my brother stopped laughing. The text basically reads something about a certain body part of Craig's being in my wife's mouth. My brother got up and handed me the phone and suddenly told me he had to go and quickly left. I didn't blame him. I got up and started videoing what I was seeing on the screen, and as I heard the toilet flush, I exited the messages and dropped the phone on the couch and quickly ran out onto our porch to make it look like I had been sitting out there the entire time. After about 5 minutes or so, she comes onto the porch, and she asks me how long I've been outside for. I told her my brother and I went to sit out there as soon as she left the living room. She looked relieved and then played it off like nothing happened and sat down next to me. I got up to walk back inside to pretend to grab another beer and saw that she had disconnected her phone from the TV, and now it's just a black screen. This was eating me alive. I had to go on a quick run afterward just to wrap my head around what I saw and to blow off some steam. I was also trying to think of ways I could get back on her phone again to send those messages to myself and to see just how far this really went. For some reason, I just had to see more. Later that night, I come up with this BS excuse that I have to re-download the app on our phones because something went wrong with the Chromecast. She's not necessarily all that tech savvy. She usually makes me do anything techie around the house whenever it comes to the internet, or she thinks I can diagnose anything to do with the TV, the internet, or our phones. She makes me download coupon apps and little whole things on her phone, so I knew if I said something like I need to re-download something, she'd likely believe me and give me the phone back. Later that night, I'm pretending to screw around with the TV before she goes for a bath. Just as she gets in the bath, I come in and I'm like, I gotta re-download this app on our phones because I accidentally unplugged something and it just messed everything up. She looks at me a bit worried and she's like, I don't really need to be connected to it, and I'm like, it'll take me like 2 minutes. Super easy, then you just have it on your phone and we don't have to worry about it later. She's like, I'll get out of the bath and help, and I'm like, no, you had a long day. Just sit back and relax. I'll be 2 seconds. She reluctantly hands me her phone and she's looking concerned. Then she tells me to be careful and not to go through anything because she has some confidential client information on there. I kind of come back and say, why she's having client conversations on her personal phone when she has something set up on her computer for that? She tells me that the system on her laptop was down for a bit and therefore she had to use her cell. Yeah, whatever. I tell her, no worries. I'm just downloading this app and then reconnecting it. She asks me if I should call my brother back and if I'm capable of doing that myself, but she says this in a way that really rubs me the wrong way, as if she's telling me that I'm weak or something or not good enough. Either way, I felt like it was a dig at me. I tell her if I have any problems, I'll call him, and I walk out of the bathroom. We've never been ones to snoop on each other's phones up until this moment. I felt like I never had to. We've always known the passwords to each other's phones, but never once have I ever snooped or checked in on what she was doing. I've always trusted her implicitly, and yeah, I guess since she's worked from home, she's been a bit more protective of it, but I chalked it up to just work, or that maybe work was getting a bit overwhelming, so she was just playing mindless games on it to decompress. Turns out she was decompressing with someone else. Other than me, with someone else in her mouth, right under my nose, right as I'm sleeping during the day or working my ass off for us in the wee hours of the morning trying to bring junkies back to life downtown. I felt like an absolute schmuck. I honestly 100% had no idea that anything was going on, and I feel like a fool for not seeing it or even letting it happen. I had to work fast, but I managed to scroll far back enough to see that the communication between my wife and Craig started last May, which was over a year ago. I screen recorded what I could so I could just go back and pause and read later, and I sent it to myself via email and then deleted it from her photos/videos and her sent box. Meanwhile, she's yelling at me from the bathroom, asking if everything is okay because I've reached the 5-minute mark by this time, and I'm trying to play it cool, saying that I'm having a problem with my phone, and she's asking me to bring her phone back. I go bring back her phone, and she asks me if everything is okay, and I'm like, yeah, figured it out, and I walked back into the living room. From there, I'm going through this video that I sent myself and reading just months worth of filth. My son no longer lives in the house with us. He lives with his buddies in a condo downtown, so I thought my wife was alone in the evenings while I was working. Nope. This guy Craig would come over, and they'd have their way with each other while I was at work. Not only that, but he's even snuck over while I've been asleep in bed. This was also rough to read. I ended up finding out Craig's last name from his Instagram page because she follows him on Instagram, which, by the way, they send each other sexy memes and lingerie ads and what have you on there too. From there, I look up Craig and quickly find that he's an attorney for a firm that my wife does work for. He started in March of last year. He looked like a pretty young guy, maybe in his late 30s, early 40s. I saw red. I went back to the screen recording and went through it slowly. It looks like she broke the news to Craig that she'd be working from home around the same time she told me she was upset about the fact that she wasn't going to see him during the week at all. This looked like the earlier stages of whatever sort of thing they had going on. But from there it quickly progressed because he said that he'd have to take her out for drinks and they could catch up there. Then shortly after I started working nights and extra shifts, she told him that he could come over for lunch or start coming over because her husband, aka me, was sleeping, but that they'd have to be quiet. I was sick to my stomach reading this. Now I'm here. It's been a few days since D-Day, and I'm trying to think of my next move, but I just wanted to write this out and see if anyone has some good advice out there. I really don't want to get screwed in this. I mean, my wife works for law firms and knows her way around the legal system, and knows people who can really take everything from me. I just have to be careful here. This whole thing just has me really messed up. Update 1. I met with a lawyer. Before I get into that, I just wanted to give a thanks to everyone who reached out and lent some advice and some tough love I needed to hear. All of it. So yeah, I met with a lawyer. First off, I ended up calling my brother and telling him what else I found, and he's been a really great support system through all of this. He actually reminded me of the friends that my STBX and I made through her work. It's a husband and wife who run their own firm. My STBX used to do some consulting for them a few years back. They were close enough that they would come over for dinner every now and again, and we went out for dinner a couple of different times and maybe a Christmas party here and there, but we ended up not seeing or hearing from them too much after my STBX's contract ended with their firm, which was maybe a year ago. My brother encouraged me to reach out and said that I just needed to be honest with them. He said that if my STBX was good enough to work for them, it meant they were good at what they did. He was right, so I reached out to the husband and told him exactly what was happening, but asked that he keep this just between the two of us because I didn't truly know the relationship that my STBX had with the wife still, and if they were close, I didn't want to risk her finding out. Anyways, he got back to me right away and basically laid everything out for me. He told me to send him the video of the text thread between her and Craig. He said send him copies of financial documents, account statements, and whatever else. He told me to open up separate accounts that I should start depositing my money into and try to take out money here and there from our joint accounts until things go down, but to not make it suspicious. He said since our son is 19 and living on his own, I don't have to worry about custody or anything like that, and said that once the papers are served to her to consider living arrangements and who's going where or who's staying where. I told him I wanted to keep the house. He said just not to discuss divorce details or badmouth her or anything like that. I haven't named names other than Craig, so I feel like we're good here. She doesn't even know what Reddit is, as far as I know. But yeah, so the papers are getting made up. My wife makes significantly more money than I do. He said I may be entitled to alimony or spousal support. We have a few investments, but those were actually made separately, and she can't take any of mine, and I'm not entitled to any of hers. We don't actually have any debts either. She paid off her student loan long ago, and I didn't have any loans like that. The biggest thing we own together is our house, which I love. We lived in it for 12 years, and I really don't want to have to get rid of it if I don't have to, but I know I can't afford it on my own. Update 2. The papers were served to my ex. I told her I wasn't leaving the house and that she had to leave. She told me that this was basically her office, and I said she can find somewhere else to work. I told her she wasn't working half the time anyways. She was inviting Craig over and having sex with him while her own husband lay in bed a few feet away. She tried to threaten me and told me that I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but the threats were empty ones because I knew she was just scared. She knew exactly who my lawyer was. After that, I told her that she had to break the news to our son. I told her that she had to tell him everything, and I said he had to hear it from her or else I'd show him the thread of messages between her and Craig. He completely sided with me. My ex tried to apologize to him, and he didn't seem to have it. He actually encouraged her to move out of the house to give Dad some space. After that, she packed up and moved out. My son has also been incredible through all of this. He's checking in on me almost every day, and we've been seeing a lot more of each other, which has been nice. Here's where things get a little juicy. What I didn't know when I contacted my attorney was that he was one of the best family law attorneys in the country, but my wife apparently knew because she tried to contact me and apologize and take back everything, to which I said it was too late for any of that. What was really interesting was when she said that she and Craig would pay me to be silent because it would ruin their careers. She said that she really messed up and she doesn't know how to fix things but desperately wants to fix things with me. My lawyer actually let me in on something. I guess while my ex was working for him, she started getting coy with a partner of the firm and leaking information. They found out and they weren't going to have that, so they gracefully dissolved that relationship and then they terminated her contract. So I guess the consulting firm that my ex worked for caught wind of this and wasn't okay with that either because they know their way around the legal system. I mean, it's their job. It took them a while to give her a slap on the wrist, but once they did, her punishment was, drumroll please, having her work from home. Basically house arrest. So everything she's been telling me has been a lie. Her firm never went to Liquid Talent, and her contract never ended naturally. With my attorney, they terminated it, and it all makes sense now why we stopped hearing from them and seeing them out of nowhere. I just thought that it might have been awkward after the contract ended, but little did I know it was awkward for an entirely different reason. Update 3. Well, we settled. She ended up giving me a large lump sum of money instead of months of alimony, which I used to buy out what was left on the house and then some, so the house is now officially mine. Thank goodness. She tried really desperately to get back with me until the very end, so much so that I had to tell my attorney, and then communication was moved to only between attorneys. It just got too weird, and I wasn't having it, and I wasn't interested in getting back together or trying to make things work because of what was going down with Craig. She ended up losing the contract with that firm too, and now she's under investigation. Rumor is that she's been aiding attorneys and breaching attorney-client privilege. Some colleagues or clients started noticing irregularities in information handling and discrepancies in case details or unusual access to confidential information. There were recorded conversations and messages and emails that were shared without the proper authorization. I guess in layman's terms, that means she knew things she shouldn't have and then told it to attorneys for the benefit of their case. So now a formal investigation was launched to the State Bar Association for breach of attorney-client privilege and other violations. But that's not the best part. This all traveled within the legal community, which led to rumors about different practices' involvement in unethical practices. It's just a giant mess, but I'm laughing. She did it to herself. I'm out of there, and I have my house and the best son a father could ever ask for. Now on to the next story. Story 7. Daughter cut me off for 17 years after my affair. She called to reconnect, but I refused. Now I have apologized, and she's visiting with my grandkid before I move overseas. I am not sure if I am the a-hole. I am going to provide some background. I am in my 60s now. I was married to my ex-wife and we had a daughter. Our marriage was going through its ups and downs, but I was really close with our daughter. But as our marriage was going through its difficulties, I made a huge mistake I still regret to this day. I started having an affair with my coworker. She was in a violent, physically abusive relationship at home. We became friends at work, and things just escalated from there. She got an out from me. She got the support she needed to file for divorce from her husband, who is currently in jail. Now, the affair went nowhere and we called it off shortly after, but I was glad that she got out of her abusive relationship and that she was safe. But when my ex-wife found out about the affair, things expectedly didn't go well. She lashed out and said a lot of horrible things about me to our daughter, who was 15 at the time. I admitted full fault with the affair, but even after the divorce, I sensed that the distance between me and my daughter was growing. Until one day my daughter said she wasn't going to speak with me anymore and she was going to cut me off from her life forever. That was the most painful thing anyone had ever said to me. I begged her to please reconsider. I still remember that day. But time passed on. My daughter kept her word, and after trying to connect with her for the first year, I gave up. I found out from one of my mutual friends that my ex-wife married a great guy. I was happy because I was hoping that would remove the hatred for my ex-wife, and my ex-wife would advise our daughter to at least rekindle a relationship with me, but that never happened. I moved states a year later. I am at peace now, but still have some lingering sadness. I have retired. Both my parents have passed away. My brother passed away tragically a couple of years ago. To be honest, I am waiting for my turn. I have only my dog and my sister left. A couple of hours ago, my daughter called me on my phone. I haven't spoken to her in 17 years. I instantly recognized her voice, but I didn't feel anything. No happiness, no sadness, just indifference. She was crying a lot on the call and we caught up on life. She's married and she has a daughter who's now 12. She apologized for cutting off contact and she says her mom asked her to reconnect with me as her mom felt guilty about how everything played out. She said she really wanted me to meet her daughter, and her daughter was constantly asking about granddaddy, but I wasn't feeling anything. After we caught up on everything in our life, I told her I don't care about her or her daughter and to never contact me again. I then hung up. Was I the a-hole? Comments. Comment 1. I hate when adults make very bad adult decisions that affect their children and then blame the children when they respond in a very childlike manner. Your daughter was a teenager. That is a rough time for kids even when their home life is stable. You gave her 1 whole year before you cut bait and gave up on her. Then you moved away. You told your daughter that she wasn't important enough to fight for, and she believed you. Now that she is an adult with a child of her own, she has reached out to you, and you again told her she wasn't important to you. She now knows she was probably right to cut you out the first time. Comment 2. She has reached out to you, and you again told her she wasn't important to you. It sounds like he's been waiting 17 years to hurt her back, and he finally got his wish. Congrats on his small, pathetic victory. Comment 3. Ain't nothing like a deadbeat narcissist claiming to be the one victim in a situation he created for himself. Comment 4. Well, it's already been said, but you're the asshole. Comment 5. You don't have to be one, though. A lot of time has passed. At least try to meet her halfway. Surely you owe her that much. Comment 6. I'm confused as to how this is even a question for Opie, but I guess he doesn't care about anything and is just waiting to die alone. How tragic. Update. Look, I was extremely drunk last night. The words which came out of my mouth weren't the best, and my comments on my post weren't great either. Seeing how everyone said I was the a-hole, I decided to call my daughter again an hour ago. I didn't really expect her to pick up the call, but she picked up immediately. I apologized for last night, and she said there was no need to apologize. I then sent her a link to this Reddit post on messages and told her I know I was the a-hole and thousands said so. She again said I wasn't the a-hole. She started crying again. I told her she's free to come to my house anytime the next 4 months because after that I will be leaving the country with my sister and our dog. Our parents left us a nice farmhouse in their home country, and we will be spending the rest of our lives there. I sent her my address on messages, and my daughter said she'd come with her husband and her daughter by the end of next week. She asked if she was welcome to stay there for multiple days, and I told her she could stay for however long she wanted, as our house was spacious enough. Another comment. Just saw the update, and good man. I hope things work out for you, and don't be hard on yourself. Life happens and sometimes things are out of our control, but I'm super glad you and your daughter have rekindled your relationship, and I hope it all turns out great for you. Maybe you're not the a-hole after all. Life's hard sometimes, and we all make emotional choices sometimes. Be well. Now on to the next story. Story 8. My mom moved my elder sister into my house because she fought with her husband. She flirted with my husband, and I kicked them out. I, 28F, have been married to my husband, Andrew, 30M, for 2 years now. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party 4 years ago. Andrew caught my eye immediately with his easy smile and quick wit. We spent most of the evening talking and laughing, and by the end of the night we had exchanged numbers. Our first date was a week later, and things just clicked from there. After dating for a year, Andrew proposed during a weekend getaway to the beach. It was simple and romantic, just the two of us watching the sunset. We got married 6 months later in a small ceremony with close friends and family. Since then, we've been living in my house, which I bought a year before meeting Andrew. The first 2 years of our marriage were mostly good. Like any couple, we had our share of disagreements and adjustments, but overall we were happy. We both work full-time jobs, so we tried to make the most of our evenings and weekends together. We enjoyed cooking meals, binge-watching TV shows, and going on short trips when we could manage it. My family consists of my dad, 58M, mom, 55F, and elder sister, Abigail, 32F. Abigail has always been the golden child in our family. She's been married to her husband, Phil, 35M, for 5 years and lives with him in his house. From what I've gathered over the years, their relationship isn't great. They argue frequently, and Abigail often complains about Phil to our parents. Last month, I was surprised when my mom and Abigail showed up at my doorstep unannounced. They rarely visit me, so I knew something was up. Mom told me that Abigail had a big fight with Phil and left him. They both started complaining about Phil, saying he was controlling and manipulative. Mom even mentioned that they were considering taking legal action against him. Then came the bombshell. Mom said Abigail needs a place to stay until we sort things out. Can she stay with you? I was taken aback. My house isn't very big, and I value my privacy. Plus, Abigail and I have never been particularly close growing up. She was always the center of attention, and I often felt overshadowed. We've maintained a friendly relationship as adults, but we're not the type to confide in each other or spend time together voluntarily. I told my mom that I needed to discuss this with Andrew first. Mom looked disappointed, but I stood my ground. I explained that it's a decision that affects both Andrew and me, and we need to make it together. Mom tried to guilt-trip me, saying family should always come first, but I didn't budge. After they left, I felt confused. On one hand, I felt bad for Abigail if she was truly in a difficult situation. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than what they were telling me. Abigail has a history of exaggerating situations to get her way, and I was cautious of getting involved in her drama. I also couldn't help but feel annoyed that this was the first time in months that my mom had visited me, and it was only because she wanted something. It brought up old feelings of being the less important daughter. When Andrew came home that evening, I told him about the situation. He was surprised but said we should help if Abigail really needed it. We agreed to think it over for a day or two before making a decision. Now I'm torn. Part of me wants to help my sister, but another part of me is reluctant to disrupt our lives and potentially get dragged into family drama. I'm also worried about how this might affect my relationship with Andrew, as we've never had a long-term guest in our home before. Am I wrong for not immediately agreeing to let my sister stay with us? Should I prioritize family over my own comfort and privacy? Or am I right to be cautious and consider all aspects before making a decision? Update 1. It's been a week since my last post. After much discussion, Andrew and I agreed to let Abigail stay with us temporarily. We set some ground rules about respecting our space and privacy, and I called my mom to let her know our decision. Mom was relieved and grateful, and Abigail moved in the next day. First, things seemed okay. Abigail was quiet and kept to herself mostly. She spent a lot of time in the guest room, saying she was looking for jobs online and researching divorce lawyers. I tried to be supportive while also maintaining some distance, but as days passed, I started noticing some changes. Andrew, who usually works late and goes to the gym after work, started coming home earlier. He'd skipped his workouts, saying he was tired or had a headache. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I realized it was happening more frequently. I also caught Abigail flirting with Andrew a few times when she thought I wasn't around. She'd laugh a bit too hard at his jokes, touch his arm while talking, or find excuses to be in the same room as him. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe I was being paranoid or reading too much into innocent interactions, but my suspicions grew stronger as Andrew's behavior towards me changed. He became more distant, often lost in thought. When I tried to talk to him about it, he'd brush it off, saying he was just stressed about work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I started paying closer attention to their interactions. I noticed how Andrew's eyes would linger on Abigail when she walked by, how he'd act when she entered the room. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Then yesterday it happened. I came home early from work due to a migraine. As I walked into the living room, I saw Andrew and Abigail on the couch. They were sitting close together, their heads bent towards each other. Andrew had his arm around Abigail, and they were speaking in hushed tones. When they saw me, they quickly moved apart, looking guilty. I was furious. I told Abigail to pack her things and get out of my house immediately. She tried to explain, saying it wasn't what it looked like, but I wouldn't listen. I was too shocked and angry to even look at Andrew. Abigail left that evening, taking her belongings with her. I haven't spoken to Andrew since then. He tried to approach me a few times, but I shut him down. I'm hurt, angry, and confused. I don't know what to do next. I feel betrayed, not just by Andrew but by Abigail too. How could my own sister do this to me? And Andrew, the man I thought I knew and loved, how could he throw away our marriage like this? I'm also angry at myself for ignoring the red flags. I should have trusted my instincts when I first noticed something was off. Instead, I second-guessed myself and allowed the situation to develop. Now I'm at a loss. I don't know if I can trust Andrew again. Even if nothing physical happened between them, the emotional betrayal is just as painful. And Abigail, I don't even know how to begin processing her actions. I've been staying in the guest room, avoiding Andrew as much as possible. He's tried to talk to me several times, but I'm not ready to hear his excuses or explanations. I need time to think and figure out what I want to do next. Part of me wants to call my parents and tell them what happened, but another part hesitates. Will they believe me, or will they take Abigail's side? as they often have in the past. Should I try to work things out with Andrew? Can our marriage recover from this? And what about my relationship with Abigail and my parents? I'm also thinking about contacting Phil, Abigail's husband. I'm curious to hear his side of the story. Now, was Abigail really leaving him because he was controlling? Or was there more to it? As I write this update, I'm still in shock. I never imagined I'd be in this situation. I took a chance on opening my home to my sister, and this is how she repays me. And Andrew, the person I trusted most in the world, has shattered that trust. I don't know what the future holds, but I know things will never be the same. I'm trying to stay strong and take things one day at a time, but it's hard. The betrayal feels like a physical pain, and I'm struggling to come to terms with it. To those who advised caution in my original post, thank you. I wish I had listened more closely to my own instincts and your warnings. To those who are following my story, thank you for your support. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. I'll update again when I have more clarity on the situation. For now, I'm focusing on taking care of myself and trying to figure out my next steps. Any advice or words of support would be greatly appreciated. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since my last update, and things have only gotten more complicated. After taking some time to process my emotions, I decided to confront the situation head-on. I called my parents to tell them about Abigail's behavior. To my shock and disappointment, they took her side. Mom said I was overreacting and that Abigail was going through a tough time. She suggested that I might have misunderstood the situation, saying Abigail would never do something like that. Dad chimed in, telling me I should be more understanding and supportive of my sister. Their reaction made me angry. I told them that they always favored Abigail, even when she was clearly in the wrong. I brought up instances from our childhood and adult life where Abigail had misbehaved or manipulated situations, but they had overlooked it. This led to a heated argument, with both sides saying hurtful things. In the end, I hung up on them, feeling more alone than ever. After the call with my parents, Andrew finally managed to corner me for a talk. He claimed that nothing happened between him and Abigail, that I was misinterpreting things. He said they were just talking and comforting each other, and that their closeness was purely platonic. When I didn't buy his excuses, he changed his tune. He said that even if something did happen, it wasn't a big deal. He actually had the nerve to suggest that I was being unreasonable and that my reaction was pushing him away. I was stunned by Andrew's attitude. He seemed more concerned about defending Abigail than addressing my feelings or the damage done to our marriage. It became clear that he was siding with her in this situation, which hurt even more than the initial betrayal. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, I received an unexpected call from Phil, Abigail's husband. His side of the story was completely different from what Abigail had told us. According to Phil, he had kicked Abigail out because she had cheated on him. He said this wasn't the first time, and he had finally had enough. He was in the process of filing for divorce. This information left me shocked. It seems Abigail had been lying to everyone about her marriage problems. She wasn't the victim she had portrayed herself to be, but rather the cause of her own marital issues. I don't know what to believe anymore. I confronted Andrew with this new information, hoping it would make him see Abigail's true colors, but to my dismay, he dismissed it as Phil trying to paint Abigail in a bad light. He accused me of trying to defame Abigail instead of being supportive. The whole situation has made me question everything. My relationship with Andrew, my family dynamics, even my own judgment. I feel like I'm living in a soap opera with lies and betrayals at every turn. I've been staying with a friend for the past few days, needing space from Andrew and the whole situation. I'm considering my options moving forward. The trust in my marriage has been severely damaged, and I'm not sure if it can be repaired. Andrew's dismissal of my feelings and his continued defense of Abigail are major red flags. As for my family, I'm hurt by their automatic assumption that I'm in the wrong. Years of favoritism towards Abigail have come to a head, and I'm not sure I want to maintain a close relationship with them if they can't see how their actions have affected me. I've started seeing a therapist to help me process everything. It's been helpful to have someone neutral to talk to about all this. She's helping me work through my feelings and think about what I want for my future. I'm also focusing on self-care and reconnecting with friends who have been supportive throughout this ordeal. Their presence reminds me that I have worth outside of my roles as a wife, daughter, and sister. I'm still unsure about my next steps. Part of me wants to fight for my marriage, to see if Andrew and I can work through this, but another part feels like the trust is irreparably broken. And then there's the issue with my family. Do I try to mend fences, or do I create some distance for my own mental health? As I navigate this difficult time, I'm trying to stay strong and true to myself. I'm learning that it's okay to prioritize my own well-being, even if it means disappointing others or going against family expectations. To those who have been following my story, thank you for your support and advice. It means more than you know. I'll update again when I have more clarity on my situation. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time and trying to find my way through this mess. Update 3, final update. It's been a month since my last update, and I finally reached some resolutions, though they're not what I had hoped for when this all began. After much soul-searching and several sessions with my therapist, I made the difficult decision to file for divorce. The trust between Andrew and me was irreparably broken, and his continued defense of Abigail and dismissal of my feelings made it clear that we were no longer on the same team. When I told Andrew about my decision, he initially tried to talk me out of it. He promised to go to couples counseling and to cut off all contact with Abigail, but it was too little too late. I realized that I deserved someone who would prioritize our relationship from the start, not just when threatened with its end. The divorce process has been challenging. Since the house is in my name, I asked Andrew to move out. He tried to argue, saying he had nowhere to go, but I stood firm. He left a week ago, taking only his personal belongings. Now he's trying to claim half of everything, including my house. I've hired a good lawyer who's confident we can prove that the house is my separate property since I owned it before the marriage. Still, it's a stressful and expensive process. As for my family, things are still tense. Abigail tried to reach out, sending me a long text message full of excuses and apologies. I've blocked her number. I'm not ready to forgive her, and I'm not sure I ever will be. My parents are upset about the divorce and keep trying to convince me to reconcile with Andrew. They don't seem to understand how deeply their favoritism towards Abigail has affected me. I've decided to take a step back from them for now. I told them I need space to heal and figure out my life. They weren't happy about it, but I need to prioritize my mental health right now. I've been in touch with Phil, Abigail's soon-to-be ex-husband. We found some comfort in supporting each other through our respective divorce processes. It's nice to have someone who understands exactly what I'm going through. He's been a surprising source of strength during this difficult time. As for Andrew and Abigail, I heard through mutual friends that they're now openly dating. It hurts, but I'm trying to focus on the fact that I'm better off without either of them in my life. Their actions have shown their true characters, and I deserve better than that. This whole experience has taught me a lot about myself. I've discovered strength I didn't know I had. I've learned the importance of self-respect and standing up for myself, even when it's difficult. I've also learned valuable lessons about setting boundaries and trusting my instincts. I'm focusing on rebuilding my life as a single woman. Scary but also freeing in a way. I've reconnected with old friends and even made some new ones through a support group for people going through divorce. Their support has been invaluable. I'm also throwing myself into my career. I've taken on some new projects at work that are challenging but exciting. It feels good to pour my energy into something positive and productive. My boss has been understanding about my situation, which has been a relief. As for dating, that's not on my radar right now. I need time to heal and learn to trust again, but I'm not ruling it out for the future. For now, I'm focusing on getting to know myself again and figuring out what I want from life. The hardest part of this whole ordeal has been dealing with the feelings of betrayal and disappointment, not just from Andrew and Abigail, but from my parents too. Their continued support of Abigail, despite her actions, has made me reevaluate my relationship with them. I'm working on setting healthier boundaries and not letting their opinions dictate my choices. Looking back, I can see the red flags I missed. Andrew and I rushed into marriage without really knowing each other well. We never had serious discussions about our values, goals, or expectations for our relationship. I also realize now that I should have set better boundaries with my family, especially regarding Abigail. This whole experience has been a harsh lesson, but I'm trying to focus on the future. I'm working on rebuilding my life as a single woman. It's scary but also freeing in a way. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm cautiously optimistic. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control of my life. It's not easy, and there are still days when I feel overwhelmed by everything that's happened, but I'm taking it one day at a time. To anyone who's been following my story, thank you for your support. Your comments and messages have been a source of strength during this difficult time. If there's one piece of advice I can offer from this experience, it's this. Trust your instincts, set clear boundaries, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Here's to new beginnings and better days ahead. We have reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us your thoughts about the stories in the comments section. Thank you and see you in the next video.